Ready? All right. We're good. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Russ Grace. I'm the Chief Operations Officer for the city, and we'll call to order the June 23rd Community Building Subcommittee. Quick roll call. Mayor Pro Tem Perkins.
Present.
And Councilor Francosa.
Here.
And Councilor Mendez.
Here.
So the first order of business is to approve the April 23rd, 2025 meeting minutes.
Move to approve the April 23rd, 2025 meeting minutes.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
That was easy. Keep going, right? So we have three items on the agenda for today. The first 45 minutes are for Lori Fahat and Austin to give an update on our sorry. Monday.
It's Monday.
It is Monday. Hi, sorry, Lori.
But it's sorry.
To give an update on the Stormwater Master Plan project that is in process right now, as well as just to bring some awareness to one of the issues that's being discussed in that around drainage and density. Then myself and Janet will give you a quick update, just to follow up on the transportation standards, and based off the previous work session we had with council, kind of what our approach is to that. Just a quick 15-minute framing of that. And then the rest of the meeting is set up for a discussion around Galveston, two-part discussion. One will be an update from Ryan Oster, who's our engineering director, on what's being planned there. And then we have a public Q&A format set up as well. So we'll start Galveston around 1 o'clock, because that's what when we gave the information out to interested parties, we said around 1 o'clock. We'll see how many people show up and want to have comments around that, and then we'll figure out how we'll work with the subcommittee to figure out how you want to handle those conversations. Yeah. So with that, I will turn it over to Lori and Austin.
All right. Okay, well, I've been introduced, so.
Incorrectly. Apologies.
Lori Faya, Environmental Resources Manager, and then Austin Somniggy's here he's the project manager for the Stormwater Master Plan. But I'll just kick it off with just a little bit of context, because often I've found that like city councils don't necessarily spend a lot of time thinking about stormwater and stormwater systems. And it's one of those actually really important things in the background. And so I wanted to give some context before Austin goes into the elements that will be in the draft Stormwater Master Plan update. And those contexts are some of the unique things about Bend and stormwater management. And because of some of those unique things, that leads to a focus not only on, well, we need to build this capital project and that capital project to solve problems, but we also need to focus on some pretty important policy and programmatic items as well. And so some of that context, I'll just mention a little bit about geology, climate, water quality, water quantity, regulations. Those are all really important things. Thank you. So one of the unique things about Bend is, so when it does rain, and it does rain, and we have snow and it melts, where does it go? And so because of our geology, where there's a lot of the city is underlain by fractured basalt, we get infiltration in a lot of areas where the water will just go down. There are a few areas where it's difficult, but you'll see on this graphic, item number A is what's called a dry well. And so that's the version of disposing of stormwater by infiltrating it into the ground. So you put it into, you do some pre-sedimentation, and then you put it into this facility that it's like a manhole with holes in the sides, and the water goes down. That's the bulk of the city is served by that. So it's very dispersed. We don't have a collection system that's collecting all the stormwater and it's going to one place and it's getting treated and managed. Most of it is dispersed all across the city in these dry wells. There are a few areas, kind of inner west side and, kind of downtown areas where there are some piped systems where, so when it rains and it runs off of impervious surfaces, it goes into catch basins and then to pipes that go directly to the Deschutes River. So again, fairly dispersed. It doesn't go in a pipe that goes to the treatment plant, and that's really important to understand here. And then picture number C shows the idea of, in some places, there are ways to cleanse that stormwater before it gets into the groundwater or into the river. And that's really important. And that's why we have regulations. The city actually has permits from DEQ for stormwater discharge and management, and I'll get into that on a different slide. But yeah, you could probably just jump to the next one. So this is my really crazy slide, but I think it's really important. It's an opportunity for me to talk about how crazy Bend's stormwater management system is. And you can see on this map, there are literally thousands of dots. Each one of those dots represents what's either called a dry well or a drill hole. It's a hole in the ground for disposing of stormwater. We have about 7,000 of these that are just in the public system that we manage. So these are typically in the right of way. So that's a lot. Again, they're not connected together. Those are individually spread across the landscape. This does not show dots for private dry wells on private property either. And then in the center of the picture, you can see some blue shaded area that has some green lines across it. That's the areas that are piped, where there's the water goes into the pipe and goes out to the river. So much smaller part of the city in this regard. So this really affects how we manage stormwater. This affects you won't see a ton of big capital projects coming out of the master plan because these are so dispersed. It's more the solutions to our problems are more programmatic in nature. And so programs and policies are really important to how we put together the stormwater master plan. The other thing, just real quickly, that's on this graphic to show you I like to call them asteroids, that those are time of travel zones for our municipal drinking water wells. And so when we think about disposing of stormwater into the ground, we have to worry about water quality from that. So not only disposing into the river, do we worry about water quality, we worry about into the ground. So we figure out time of travel. How long does it take from groundwater to get from one place to another? The tips of those asteroids are the locations of municipal wells, and we particularly focus on extra protective management in like that kind of yellow zone where it's about 2 years of time of travel to a drinking water well. So these are very important concepts to us. You can move to the.
Could you say just one more thing about that?
You bet.
Or two more things, actually. One is repeat what the colored vector is.
So there's different colors on it. So those are time of travel. So the purple is the furthest. That's like 10 years time of travel. So if water goes into the ground here and we have a well over here, the purple, that means it's like 10 years to travel to that well underground. And so the yellow is like the 2 year, so it's that 2 to 5 year zone that we're most concerned about. It takes that long for water to travel
And they
underground.
sort of center on a blue dot.
Yeah.
Or is it?
Oh, and the blue circles, so I'm sorry, you're right, there's blue circles on there too. The blue circles are private drinking water wells. And so for those, we draw a protective line around them that right now the standard is a 500-foot diameter protective area for that. We're looking at some revisions to that based on some new groundwater protectiveness studies we've done. But yeah, so this tells you how complicated and how interconnected the things we do are, because when you think about that, we've added pavement, we've added rooftops, all of that can generate pollution that when it rains or the snow melts, it can travel to these different places, potentially with pollutants. Because every time we drive a car, we have little tiny bits of tire and brake pads and things like that that are coming off, that are contributing metals, that are contributing other pollutants that we need to be worried about.
So we have the green dots represent the city-owned dry wells, and what about the blue and the purple dots?
So the green and the gold dots are the city-owned systems. Some of them are what's called dry wells, some are called drill holes. If you want to get real nerdy, I can talk about the difference, but they both inject water into the ground. The blue circles are those private drinking water wells.
What are the brown ones again? Or gold? You call
Those
them?
are called drill holes. So that was the old way of disposing of water. You'd hire somebody to a well driller to drill a hole in the ground that's maybe 6 inches in diameter, and you drill it deep enough until the stormwater goes away. And those can be a problem because we don't have pre-treatment on them and they can clog up.
And then it looks like in the southeast, there's like some purple dots.
In the southeast, some purple dots. Those are newer, those were just newer dry well systems.
Thank you.
Mhm. So as can you, want them to be able to see everything with the little, I guess you can't move that one. That's okay, I'll tell you what's on it.
Mine's closed. I think it's on. We go. Thank you.
Oh, okay, thank you. So we have, from a water quality standpoint, you do stormwater management for two reasons. One is to prevent flooding. So I think everybody probably recognizes, every once in a while we've seen big thunderstorms and we've seen flooding under like Franklin and Greenwood, right? Those are things we've identified in the past. We're on the path to solving those. There's also localized flooding issues, of ADA ramps and things like that when it rains. The other reason is for water quality purposes, so to protect the river, to protect the groundwater, and also because we have regulatory requirements. So the Department of Environmental Quality has issued 2 permits to the city of Bend that allow us to discharge stormwater as long as we do certain best management practices. And one is a permit for discharging to the river, and the other is for discharging to the groundwater. And our river-based permit, I can tell you all the acronyms if you really want, but I won't. That one was issued, our latest permit was issued in 2021, and we have these annual deadlines that require us to do more and more things. Some of those we're addressing with the master plan. And our underground injection permit, actually DEQ is in the process of reissuing a new one for us. So in the next couple of months, we should have a new permit for that. But basically, those permits make us do best management practices. So the reason why we have an erosion control program for construction is because of those permits. The reason why people have to build some sort of facilities on site to manage stormwater, whether that be like dry wells, but it also could be like these filtration facilities like the swales here, are because of the standards from that permit. We have to show that we're doing maintenance practices like sweeping streets and cleaning out catch basins to remove sediment and pollutants from the system. We have to do education. So that's why you might see TV commercials or things like that, or our student video competition. And we have to have codes and programs to prevent illicit discharges. Because these go straight to the river or the groundwater, you don't want to be dumping anything in the catch basins. It should just be clean water. We monitor at 7 locations across the city to see what the quality of the stormwater looks like. And then this picture shows the Newport Avenue project, which was largely a stormwater project that then we added other elements onto. So I think that's it for me, and I should hand it over to Austin to tell you what's now going to be in a master plan. Just wanted you to have a little context of the stormwater system works.
Thanks, Lori. So yeah, today we're going to give you a brief update on where we're at right now with the master planning process. And here's a look at kind of the topics we're going to get into. But like Lori mentioned, just kind of relating to like a water system master plan or collection system master plan, stormwater master plan is highly influenced by the 2 stormwater permits. And like she showed and demonstrated, our dispersed system kind of separates from that water and sewer system collective network that we have. So the purpose of the master plan effort was to provide an update to the 2014 stormwater master plan, and then primarily is to identify that capital improvement program. So like Lori mentioned, the 2 main efforts there were to identify projects that will, 1, improve drainage issues that we have throughout town, and then second, to identify water quality improvements that we can do for discharges into the river. Along with those kind of core capital program efforts, we also took a look at a handful of policy topics, and that being mostly climate change, drainage density, and level of service that we'll get into here. So right up here, we have an overall timeline. I printed some handouts. So I'm not going to get into too much detail, but if there's any specific questions really about our timeline and process, I'm happy to answer some questions here at the end of the presentation. During the project, we did kind of a number of outreach efforts. The primary audience that we worked with was the Water Advisory Group, and they were really our main sounding board of external stakeholders throughout the community, from our visioning to establish our values, and then through our scoring and evaluation of these capital projects. They were the major sounding board that we had, but they also weighed in on some of those policy topics that we mentioned. And then amongst the other groups, we had a roundtable discussion with some of the local engineering firms in town, thankfully held by AKS. We did a presentation to NACOBA, just giving them an update of the draft findings and efforts that we were doing. Internally, we had a lot of discussion, not only workshopping to identify the issues and problems, and reviewing some of the capital projects, but also particularly with the drainage and density policy topic, with our engineering planning groups to dig in a little bit about some of that topic that we'll get into. We met with the city of Redmond, who gave us some updates on some recent changes they made to managing stormwater, which will again apply to that development density issue. And then we've been providing updates to our project webpage that give our timeline, outlines, and some preliminary findings. All right. So onto the capital improvement. Again, this is really kind of the meat and potatoes of a master plan. Taking it all the way back, we did a series of workshops to identify the issues, and then identified our priorities. So what were the things that we really wanted to weigh in on to help score these projects? From there, we basically we developed a matrix that we then ran all of our known issues through, and then ultimately that provided us a list of capital projects. And so you can see kind of a snapshot map here. The blue and the orange stars, those distinguish between a drainage project. Again, that's more of a local flooding risk perspective, whereas the orange are identifying projects that have a water quality focus, or a combination of the two. And again, most of those are discharges to the Deschutes River. Here you're going to see, and I want to emphasize, this is a draft of the cost evaluation. So we're developing these, what we're calling not toolkits, cut sheets for all these different projects, given the overall issues, approach to solutions, and then high level cost estimates for those. And we are working on finalizing these here in the coming weeks. So overall though, we're seeing a roughly $22 million capital. That's implementation over the next 5 to 10, possibly 20 years, which does correlate with our current budgeting. So aside from the major capital projects, we also looked at some programmatic solutions, and those were really breaking into two main categories. Those are those underground injection controls that Lori was talking about, either dry wells or drill holes, and then also a major maintenance program, which are some of the issues that didn't quite tip the scale of a capital project. So taking a look at the underground injection controls, the two main categories we found are drill hole decommissioning and retrofit program. This is primarily focused on groundwater protection. If you recall those kind of astropop-looking time of travel maps, you can see a lot of the 17 highest priority drill holes that were identified were ones that are in those 2-year time of travel zones to our municipal wells. So that's what really brought those to the highest focus. And then, really trickling down the line, setting those priorities that the intention is to have a maintenance program where we could address some of these year after year. Along with those, we have identified 18 failing UICs, either ones that are causing nuisance flooding throughout the city and could use for a rehab. And then one of the tools that we brought in and are recommending is what we're calling a modified dry well. And these are drywalls that are, go a little bit deeper than traditional. And with the master plan, we did some studies to figure out what is that appropriate separation from our groundwater to prevent contamination, and then also recommending areas of low contaminant risk where these could be implemented. It's something that is currently undergoing workshops with our water services group and our engineering departments to figure out how we want to bring these into our standards in certain contexts and situations. But again, the main focus here is in those like poor draining parts of town where you have like well to tough, primarily on South Elbury Butte, or the west side of town where you don't have that good infiltrating fractured basalt to get past those tough draining layers to get that infiltration when we still have confidence that we have separation from our groundwater table. So the other programmatic solution we looked at is major maintenance. And so these are nuisance issues that we've cataloged through the workshops, but could potentially be, either done as synergy opportunities with other capital projects, or even solutions implemented in-house. So what we're going to be providing is, along with our GIS layers, basically summaries of these locations and issues and contexts that we can hopefully start to put solutions into place. So now I'm going to move into some of our policy recommendations. And the first one we looked at is climate change. So we first wanted to get an idea of how the changing climate is going to impact the stormwater to the city of Bend in the future. And what we found out was that the Atlas 2 is the current NOAA forecasting of what the precipitation in Central Oregon is expected to be. This is the basis of our design criteria. So when either privately or publicly you design stormwater systems, you base them on these storm events. Well, these storm event, this data was last updated in 1973. So one of the major takeaways from this is that we need to update our data for today. And then also looking forward to the future, we're looking to have an actual increase in overall precipitation around 6% annually. But more importantly, the intensity and the frequency of these storms are only expected to increase. So you may recall in the last couple of years, especially on South Elbury Butte, we've been seeing, nearly half of the 24-hour storm event show up in 20 minutes. And that has a completely different and dramatic impact on how our stormwater systems can handle this precipitation. And so trying to just establish awareness to this, and as we move forward, start to consider how we can change our standards or incorporate this into our design. But we're also looking to have a decline in our snowpack, and then those seasons, the shoulder seasons, are looking to get more stratified. So more intense winters followed by really dry summers. One thing that's interesting coming out of this, particularly with the data that we found out is really outdated. We've been working with our water conservation group and next slide. With the Bureau of Reclamation Agromet, they're in the process of providing us 6 additional monitoring weather stations that we can put throughout our town to get better data that we can then hopefully use that to update our stormwater precipitation storms. So basically the summary of our findings is to get better historical rainfall data and collaborating with our regional partners in those efforts too. The next and probably most robust policy topic we went into is drainage density. And this one really most directly relates to our housing goals. So as we've seen this increase in density and development on these single family lots, now accommodating multiple units, we're just seeing that lot coverage increasing. And that ultimately yields with more impervious area, which is more stormwater runoff. And so trying to figure out how can we best fit these stormwater facilities on these sites. We're finding a lot of these sites aren't really managing the stormwater well. We're seeing runoff into the public right of way or onto neighboring properties, causing local flooding issues, erosion into parks and common corridors, and ultimately a large burden for the stormwater management group. And so we wanted to look at what may be a better or more holistic way to manage this stormwater. And so what we did is we actually took a look at our existing code and found, so what we're going to be recommending with the master plan is really some immediate action items and then some kind of future continuation of what we started with the master plan. So the first would be just a real increase in our regulatory compliance in these kind of offsite stormwater management facilities, a higher early on evaluation of stormwater management all throughout the development process, but also confirmation that these facilities are performing. And a lot of that is directed and governed through our stormwater permits that Lori alluded to earlier. But then the other we want to look at and talk more about is that our code actually allows for a lot more of what are these subdivision level facilities where you could have multiple lots draining to a common area. Here's an example of one on the southeast side of town where it's basically a privately owned parcel of land that has a stormwater maintenance agreement that manages multiple private lots. And so we found the code actually does allow for this. And so just encouraging upfront a higher level of awareness and discussion about stormwater management. But then continuing the conversation is looking at potentially moving towards more of a larger centralized approach that would potentially be owned and managed by the public. So these would be city-owned facilities. It would allow for multiple private lots to drain either to those larger swales, infiltration ponds, UICs, and ultimately become city-owned to manage. So these would most likely be put in at times of like infrastructure and subdivision developments, and also looking at possible options of fee in lieu for some of these small infill sites or area specific, specialty plan districts like the Bend Central District. But this is going to require more conversation internally to make sure through the planning department, the private development and engineering department, and the water services group that everybody's getting their appropriate input taken. And with that, I will pass it back over to Lori to talk about level of service.
Yeah, I'll just be real quick on this one so we can finish up on this and take questions. But it's really important for us to think about the level of service we're providing with the whole stormwater program. That relates to not only, what our customers getting an appropriate level of service? Are we meeting our permit requirements for maintenance and management? And level of service will then relate to cost of service, which then at some point becomes an input to options, when a future rate study is completed. And so this just lists across the screen some of the things that are related to level of service. There are a lot of aspects to owning and managing a system. So we have to think about, are we doing a good job now? And also if we do things like allow for these more regional stormwater management facilities that the city might manage and maintain, there would be a cost to that. And how would we accommodate that within our existing system? So this is just talking about, should we be reactive or proactive? We actually feel like in a lot of areas, we do a pretty good job of responding to stormwater complaints and issues now. We get on top of them, but we can't always solve the underlying problem now because we don't have like some of the programmatic areas, the major maintenance program areas that we probably need to be able to solve those. And there's also a concern about whether service levels are in fact starting to reduce because of system growth and not any increase in staffing, frankly, to manage the maintenance of the system.
So looking at the next steps, we're looking to have a draft completed here in the coming weeks. That's going to get internal review, take it back to our stakeholders, and then post some of our findings on the webpage. Initially, we were proposing to take this to council in September, but recently we found, I think we'll have to basically abridge this to create the public facility plan to make sure there's no contradictions to the comprehensive plan, which the PFP is an appendix to. So the actual date right now to bring this to council initially was thought to be September. Maybe a couple months after that to get this public facility plan finalized. But then, and then further cost of service evaluations into the next rate cycle. So with that, I'll take a pause for any questions.
That's a lot.
Thank you for that. So 2 questions. One is, I want to do everything we can to make sure that we're protecting the quality of our groundwater. And Austin, I think you touched on this a little bit when you were talking about the underground injection control framework. But if we're primarily relying on dry wells, how sustainable is that in the long term for the kinds of pollutants that aren't adequately, trapped or immobilized or aren't degrading? Do we have things that we need to be worried about from a policy perspective?
So that's a great question. I really appreciate that. So one of the things we do with our newer standards for building new dry wells is we put what's called a sedimentation manhole in front of it. So that allows for pollutants to settle out, has this little elbow in the pipe so that oil and grease won't get sucked into the dry well itself. So we want to see things built to that higher standard that does provide water quality benefits. That will remove the majority of the pollutants. Most pollutants like to attach themselves to sediment and then can get settled out. But we also recently did a groundwater protectiveness demonstration evaluation because we wanted to know about like the forever chemicals like PFAS, which don't like to stick to things like sediment. And so we had modeling performed to see how far those pollutants might travel over many, many years of time of stormwater events. How far might they go down into the ground horizontally or vertically? And so our recommendations reflect that about having enough distance from the bottom of these facilities to our groundwater table and enough distance from wells.
So those pretreatment basins, those require regular maintenance then?
Yes, there's no such thing as a no maintenance facility.
Uh-huh.
So even the ones, the ones with the landscaping that are in areas where the water gets filtered through the plants and the soil and then gets discharged. Those have maintenance for those plant materials, for collecting debris, when we put rock on the road in the winter, collecting all of that as well.
Thank you. It's good to know that you're looking into those kinds of things, because I think that's a big concern. The second question, if it's all right. Have there been material innovations that we're looking at into permeable surfaces, things like interlocking pavers or more porous concrete? Or are there things, considering that we're seeing more lot size coverage and more impervious surfaces, what about, can we learn anything from what other countries are doing or things like that?
We definitely can. So porous pavements are definitely a concept that's out there. There's a lot of concern about wear and tear on roadway surfaces. But they're definitely used in some cases. There's some great examples around. Bend Parks and Rec District has been putting in porous pathways for a long time, and we can take a look at those ideas as well. So those are a tool in the toolkit. The place where it's really hard to implement them is to try to require those lot by lot and think that, somebody's going to buy a house, it has porous paving, and are they going to know what that is and maintain it over the long haul? And could we possibly inspect, every single lot? So that's where it's more difficult.
And that kind of goes to the early planning of stormwater management. So one of the major pushing factors of regulation and just stormwater management in general is the concept of low impact development, which is exactly what you're talking about. Pervious pavers, but even still, the roof area coverage and things like that, these lots are getting denser and denser. And then on top of that, if you have these, subdivisions coming in where we're, mass grading these entire sites, you kind of lose a lot of that, initial what once was pervious ground is now compacted to a structural strength, which doesn't drain quite as well. So, those are things like, any way we can push and recommend and steer and encourage that low impact development from the get-go, and just having awareness that every impervious surface you have now needs to manage stormwater. But yeah, it kind of falls on that developer side of things for the most part.
Now I'm enjoying imagining, a porous roof or something like that. Well, that would be a hard house to sell.
It would probably,
Well, it's
especially
the green roof, actually,
Yeah.
and there are some examples out there.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have a question about, related to the master plan and some of like the problem areas around town. How will the master plan kind of go into detail and talk about like actual catch basin level like location? So if folks have complained or they know their catch basin is a problem, how do they verify that the city has that on their radar?
So we compiled everything we had available to us about complaints.
Mhm.
And then we focused on the ones that were kind of repeat or larger problem complaints. But we do actually have a whole list, and the whole purpose of having like a major maintenance program component to the recommendations is so that we can keep that list, we can keep it updated, and we can go after them one by one, because a lot of those problems aren't big enough to be like an individual capital project.
Right.
So, and we couldn't pay the consultant enough to identify exact solutions for little tiny problems, so we combined them into a,
Yeah, I can show you kind of a quick little timeline, so here's
and we have spreadsheets.
here's 12 pages of basically the results of a series of workshops where it is at that fine-tuned level of like, here's an issue. And then through that, we refined it. We've then developed flowcharts about, okay, from these issues, how do we go to develop these projects and what meets the Richter scale? And then with that, we have our iterations of our scoring matrices that primarily focus on flooding and water quality, but then also giving a little extra points if there's like multiple benefits that we can get out of that. And that's a series of things, which ultimately led us, into the development of this major spreadsheet that then has all the specific categories, and then what does get into either the capital project or the major maintenance list. And so, yeah, I think we intend to make these available in the form of an appendix. But yeah, this is kind of what we have on that specific scale of catch basin problem.
And if people have an issue, Bend Works is the best. Is that the best
Yep.
avenue to submit?
Definitely.
Complaints? Awesome. And then maybe one more question, building on Ariel's line of questioning. Do we have street standards that allow for say on a quiet neighborhood street to have swales on the side of the street as opposed to curb, gutter, catch basin?
Wow, Janet. Like right
Is this
to
a
your
lead-in?
discussion about updating standards.
That's gonna be my public comment to add on, so. No, this is where it all overlaps, right? And we have an opportunity to certainly do that.
Sweet.
Yeah, most of what you see is kind of main standards where we have curbed. We used to allow private streets that had the swales. We don't allow private streets anymore. But we are trying to get more of it. We call it is part of the low impact infrastructure of putting these elements in there. So those are type of the standards, things we want to continue to look at.
And I think doing this work identified, we probably need to get creative in order to resolve more of these issues, especially the one-offs. And they also overlap in different areas with the biking infrastructure, right? Some of those complaints are in ponding areas in the bike lanes and things, so it all kind of integrates. Yeah.
The one thing I want to just get on council's radar is just this connection to when you start looking at the density that we're going to get around town, it is, and how the city's been built to this point, that needs to start to shift just because, as Councilor Mendez says, everything's getting tighter, smaller lots, smaller things. So the need to come up with more kind of regional solutions or area solutions, which will require the city to step in more and maintain those, is a different level of service than we have provided in the past. There's no immediate thing that needs to be done about that. We just want to get that on council's radar because we're going to be asking the water services group to maintain more stuff in the future as we continue to develop. So that'll be part of the fee and the rate schedules.
And I guess one more thing I'll mention, a product of the master plan, we're going to have 13 toolkits. And those are just different, facility types. And that could be some of the new ones like street trees, drainage, kind of shoulder trenches and things like that. That's for some of those like incorporated parts of the city that used to be in the county that don't have curbs. But those are basically going to have like overall approaches with some high level cost estimates, the hopes of helping either the private or public development community, look at tools that are available in the toolkit.
I like that. I mean, it sounds like when you talk about sort of reactive versus proactive, you feel, pretty confident and you're reactive, but I love this idea and something that I would be looking for in this master plan of like, how do we start getting proactive and what are the things that council needs to be aware of that might be holding you back from that, whether it's financial or staff or whatever. So.
I always think about the great area, think about is the core area, right? How do we handle drainage as an area? Because you have very intense development on very small lots in there. and we're building street infrastructure. So what do we design those systems to?
Mhm. One last small thing. You talked about needing better forecasting and better data. Are there any of the cuts that we're seeing in that from the federal government? Actually, do you anticipate that impacting this project?
Well, I mean, fortunately, the Bureau of Reclamation is committed to us so far. And so that was something that we were actually able to work with the Aubrey Waterline project. So that was the other project I was working on, the rehabilitation of the reservoir yard. We said this would actually be a good location for one of those weather stations. So we consider that and the restoration of that, so that would be a suitable site for one of these that we're gonna, meet with them in a couple weeks here to look at actually getting these in place. And so we're gonna be collecting our own data. I mean,
So that allows us to be proactive because you're right, there's concerns at the federal level. And NOAA was supposed to be coming out with a new atlas, they call it, of compiled rainfall information. That's probably going to be delayed. So us putting these in, I think puts us on the proactive side to get our
Great.
own data.
Love it.
anything else?
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, let me pull up the next. I'm gonna ask Janet to come on up on the table. Yeah. So what we'd like to do is just give the subcommittee a brief kind of follow-up on the previous conversation we had at a work session with council around the transportation standards. And we got feedback from council. And what we're going to do is kind of mirror some of that feedback back to you, as well as kind of show and outline our plan of attack on how we want to work through this conversation, because it goes at a bunch of different levels. So what we'll talk about today is kind of what led to the standards updates, what we're trying to achieve, how we're going to approach it, the timeline, and kind of next steps of how we're going to work through this. So as council's aware, there have been a lot of discussions going on, whether it's just in terms of policies of what we allow across the city, and our detailed project discussions that we've been having around elements of capital improvement projects. And those range from where and why do we put raised crossings? How do we get people across our major roads safely? A lot of conversations around how do we control speeds around the city? How do we introduce new things? We know there's interest in looking at residential modal filters, quick builds and pilot projects, and then also conversations around our cross sections and kind of development requirements as well. So the need for the standards update is, from staff's perspective and what we heard from council, is that the city's deployed several different concepts over the past several years. We've also been dealing with kind of the policies that were adopted in our TSP and how those got related, our transportation system plan, how those got related to our standards. But we have a lot of different things out in the field right now. We know there's interest with taking those standards and developing them to another level as well. So what staff's objective is, we want to adopt clear standards based on feedback and operations on what systems we're using and where we're going to deploy those throughout the city. We know there's a lot of interest from the community and council around safety and mobility and speeds. And we want to make sure that those design tools come in as more standard options, especially if we're going to start selecting products and things like that, so that not only do we know what tools we want to implement, but also want to make sure that David's teams can easily maintain these, and we don't have 20 different systems out there, different delineators or different Dura curves and things like that as we start to put this stuff out there. And then the other conversation we have is related to the cost and implementation challenges with infrastructure requirements for different housing types, especially infill. There's a project that picture is of 5th and Franklin. It's a great example of an infill project. I know Gina's aware of this one. It's a gravel road, dirt road now. When development comes in, what do we want to make development build as part of that improvement when we don't have the full systems? We'd like to have that conversation as well as we go through this. So the objectives, and this is based off of feedback we got from council and also staff input, is making sure that we're putting the right users on the right roads and building them accordingly. We are still implementing the current 2020 transportation system plan policies, but we're also building to the future. So we'll talk about how we're going to do that, because we are still grounded in our last transportation system plan. Want to review the right-of-way and street section standards. We know there's a desire to look at maybe some thinner sections, both in right-of-way and street widths. Increase safety through looking at vehicle speeds, separation protection, improve safety at major crossings, and also making sure we have travel time reliability on the system. And how do we define that? Also know there's a desire for faster implementation around quick build and pilot projects, and also conversations around we want to look at these low-cost solutions, but we don't want to sacrifice quality or durability when we go do these things. We want to reduce costs and timelines for infill and housing, as you know, as it relates to infrastructure. And we also know there are a lot of interested parties in having this conversation as well. So we want to make sure that we involve that input into our conversation. I'm going to look to Janet, please add as we go through. Here's some examples of what we're talking about and what we want to do with that. Some on the technical side is introduce new cross sections into our standards, so they and our development code, so they can be used appropriately and make sure we know what the rules of engagement on where and how and why those different cross sections can be used. I love the tool that Janet came up with around a slow speeds toolbox. So how do we use and deploy those around town? We talk about raised crossings, speed tables, and modal filters. We know there's interest in our streetscape standards, so lighting, mode separation. Also, how do we work, make sure there's clear direction on how we work sidewalks and pass around existing trees and things like that. We have several design guides, which Janet can go into. You see one right there. We have a complete streets manual that's referenced in our standards and specs, but we think there's elements of that that actually should be pulled into and be part of the standards and specs. Same with our roundabout design guides and things like that. Also make sure that we have rules of engagement. We know around the other part of speed management is speed limits and designations and zones and where we put those and how we can adjust those. Make sure that our standards match those desires. And we also, this is more on the technical side, we want to reduce the need for waivers and design exceptions, both through our capital projects as well as our private development projects, to simplify the process that they work through some design elements. On the development code side, we specifically want to talk to council around the sidewalk fee in lieu, especially for infill projects. When you have onesie, twosies developments and they're required to build sidewalk, how do we want to do that in an area that may not have a complete system? And then again, talk about those infill infrastructure requirements to make sure that we are achieving council's goals of how we want to build areas of the city that don't have all the key infrastructure already in. We are interested in getting pilot projects and quick build concepts out there as in the near future. I know there's desires by council to do that. And talk a little bit about how that also dovetails this funding conversation that we need to have around transportation projects. Then also making sure that we, make sure that we have the key stakeholders there, as we've talked about before, but really bring in public safety, fire and police, make sure they're on board with this, and also emergency management. As council's aware, we've had a lot of conversations around evacuations, and a lot of these labels are not. Sometimes they have some opposing forces on them of trying to build the system one way or another based on depending on what you're trying to achieve. Make sure the school district and park district is in there, and then obviously engage with the neighborhood districts, the general public, and interest groups that have a desire to talk about this. So how will we do this? We're going to really break this up into 3 phases. So in the near term, really over the next year, what we're going to be looking at is there's a list of things that we have that we want to just administratively update the standards. That is a lot under Ryan, who's our city engineer, his direct purview, to make sure the standards are working as seamlessly as they can, and things that we can just incorporate administratively. We want to do that as quickly as we can. Along with that, we will start to develop our public engagement and our consultants that we need for phase 2, which will really kick off in the fall, where we want to have a facilitated discussion with the community and with council around some of these bigger, kind of more community-wide topics around street sections, safety and speeds, and the development code updates. And then we'll also determine with council where we want to reprioritize our transportation project funding. We talked about this at the last work session a little bit as just a kind of a concept around that with Franklin and the Midtown crossings, but we know we need to have a much broader conversation around the next prioritization of projects, especially around the GEO bond. But with that, we also want to work with council to determine, do you want to set aside some money to do some pilot and demonstration projects, and how much and for what as well? Because we can incorporate a lot of things into the standards. We also need to make sure if we want to deploy those on the ground, where are those funding dollars to do that, and how big or small of a scale do we want to look at with some of those pilot projects which we can answer questions to. And at the same time, we're going to be taking a lot of the some of the feedback we get through these discussions and really using that as inputs into the higher level policy, because they may not be directly in the realm of just a standards update. It's more of like, how and why does this transportation system perform this way, and how do we want to perform? Those are really inputs into the growth plan and the transportation system plan update that's going to be occurring over the next 3 to 4 years. So we're going to be separating out some of the topics that are brought up during these discussions. Say, this is not a standards conversation. This is more of a policy conversation that needs to get incorporated into those bigger documents coming at a later date. And just real quick on how we're going to fund this. So the phase 1 things, we can do all that with our in-house staff. On the phase 2, which will run over the next biennium, is really getting consultants on board to help us with the public engagement facilitation. Also reach out and get some technical expertise, some new voices in the room around kind of what's out there, what's been working well, what hasn't. And then also use potentially consultants to help to actually develop the standards, doing the drawings and making sure that the specs are correctly as we put them into our standards and specs. In the fall, we'll have that big funding conversation with council as well, which will also give us an idea of where and how we're going to deploy some of these dollars to achieve the goals the council wants to do. And then all the long-term objectives around the growth plan, those are already identified in the next biennial budget and the future budgets as part of the growth management team. So that's just a real quick kind of overview of what we're trying to achieve. And we're here. Janet, I don't have anything to add on how we want to approach. Janet will be, along with Ryan, will be heavily involved in the process as we go through at all stages. And then we'll also bring our development code team in as well for those development code updates, Pauline and Colin and Renee. Questions, comments?
Can I go first this time? I imagine Councilor Mendez has comments too. On the approach slide 7 of 10, phase 1 near term administrative standards update. I just want to make sure this phase also includes a public engagement or at least a public comment. And maybe even this committee, the subcommittee, gets a chance to kind of see what those public comments are and either, advocate for them being included in the administrative standards or
A broader conversation.
Yeah, exactly.
That's
So
a good idea.
I just want to make sure that the standards update isn't, so narrowly focused that we, miss low hanging fruit.
The other thing I'll say too is as we go through this, we may, instead of doing like big updates, we may be bringing smaller pieces, right? To try to move things through faster, because a lot of times we start to bring these across not only the administrative, but also the larger conversation. Like if we get hypothetically cross sections figured out, well, let's just get those drawn up and adopted so we can start using them while we're having other larger conversations.
Great, yeah.
Well, we recently saw this challenging conversations around crossing, and I think speeds are a big part of that. And I saw, on the slide that said right users on the right roads. I'm wondering, where do you see in this process the policy conversation around the right speeds on the right roads?
Probably turn to Janet, her thoughts.
Yeah, there probably at every step, there'll be some element of it, because there's a number of things we can do under the, the state law. There's some things that we can do with the way our current hierarchy, right, of roads and arterial collector and our cross sections are set up. And then there's something probably for the TSP discussion. So I think you're gonna see that at every element.
I wonder if it would be helpful for us to have that conversation more holistically ahead of time, because I worry that if we leave it piecemeal, we end up kind of having the same conversation over and over again, where we get into the challenges of state regulation and what are the right tools to achieve this. And I feel like we don't really have the sort of overall North Star or guiding principle that would, I think, permeate all of this, as you suggested. So I wonder if maybe we want to think about having that, like, what are our goals for ahead of time that would then inform each of these stages, as opposed to saying, let's kind of have the same conversation over and over again.
And we can do that. I think in order to thread it all, we need to kind of come up with a sort of a speed management plan as a piece of the standards update that will outline that. And that's something that we can come back to probably earlier in that sequence of like, hey, here's where we're thinking these elements are, here's some because there will be some policy things and maybe some lobbying things, should we choose a path, right, that we can do, which I think a little bit is what you're getting at.
I think one of the goals, what we want to do is develop kind of, we just want to give you an update of kind of where we are here. And then we would come back to the full council probably in the fall of saying, here's our, early fall, here's our approach, here's the topics, here's how we're grouping them. Make sure and we can't work through everything at one time. So what do we want to prioritize first? If speed is the first, kind of topic we want to go after, then we'll have a plan of attack to do that. And then, then is it cross sections and development standards, or how do we want to approach that? But I feel like we'll bring that the full plan back to
So in the
council.
fall, we'll have that. Sounds like
Yeah.
we'll have that. Will we be able to have some input in the fall about the communications and engagement plan?
Yeah,
For this?
yeah.
And just clarifying that, I think the idea was the first step would be pretty much more of the straightforward updates that we've gotten feedback already from the community on, and
Mhm.
including those, and the public comments, more of the like technical check of like, this is right, any little, did we miss something? Whereas the next section would be more of what we're doing, a more full, more robust public engagement
Great.
plan. That ideally, if it all worked out, maybe we do some demonstration projects and are out in the field collecting information
Yes.
at those. Because in addition to doing all this, we're still enrolling a lot of the public and bringing them along with where the state law is headed, right? I don't
Yeah.
think everybody's really aware of the changes that are coming. And so we can do that, in the field with issues that they're all aligned on, with speed and crossing and some of these other things. And I think
And I think,
we'll get
yeah,
better support, and it'll put you in better positions as we're having some of these projects come forward with why we're doing them. So it's kind of a marketing effort. So that second piece
mhm,
is why it's so important. We've included the engagement plan early.
mhm. Yeah, and I think just focusing on areas that are geographically underrepresented and also people that are underrepresented in these discussions, I think would be very important to me.
Maybe one last question before we move on. I'm curious, talking about pilot and demonstration projects, like what would that look like? Because part of me kind of feels like, we're not reinventing the wheel here, that we're going to be using stuff that's used in many other cities. Maybe it's new to Bend. And so if that's the case, then, why don't we just use CIP dollars that we already have? And, instead of building things maybe the same old way, call it a demonstration project, use that line item budget, and, do things a little bit differently.
I think that's a conversation we want to have with council in the fall of saying, how do you want us to go about this, and how do you want us to prioritize? Because there's limited funding out there. I think we have interest in doing some pilot projects. I think it'll be really on some topics when you're talking about, like, are you looking at access controls into residential larger residential areas to create kind of the greenways, more protected greenways across the city, so that we can use those also as inputs into when we develop the transportation system plan and the growth plan. Because we know sometimes policies are going to have to change. But to directly your question, yeah, we want to have that conversation, and that's why that funding conversation is really important in the fall too, to figure out, like, where are we spending the full-blown capital dollars, or where do we want to try something under a pilot project, or create a bucket of funds and say, yes, we want to use this to go do these type of pilot projects around the city.
Is there an example of a pilot project or a demonstration project that you feel you don't have the flexibility to do right now, or the funding to do right now?
I think some of them are, the CIP projects, like you're talking about reallocating, those are some of the bigger projects on bigger streets. There's some smaller projects on other streets, like, a temporary median. I was trying to think of an example on the north end of Division Street. We don't have funding to put a crossing, and there's no crossings on that whole section, which affects speeds in the whole corridor. More people walking and living in that area. So, and in order to do it, you'd be blocking off one of the northbound left turn entrances. There's other ones to circulate. So you could do that as a pilot project, get some feedback, so, people can see the benefit. And it's not a capital project. It's not an NSSP project. So for these, there's a subset of projects that will get, like some exposure to the things we're trying to do that where there's no other funding. And then there's the other case of maybe some capital projects where we go in advance while we're building them, to your point, or maybe that's what you do instead of building some of them. So it's two different areas.
Got it. Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
and we can work to come up with a list of, kind of where, I know Janet's always got the running list in her head of areas around town that would be a great concept or great area to try something like this.
Thanks.
All right,
Thank you.
all right. So I'm going to frame up as Ryan comes up the next discussion around Galveston. And for those of you that are in the audience, if you are interested in speaking or providing feedback, I'd ask you, there's sign up sheets over there. If you wouldn't mind filling those out and giving those to Michelle. Can you raise your hand, Michelle, over there? Just so we know how many people would like to talk. What we're planning to do today is to provide not only the subcommittee, but I know there's a lot of interested parties in where we are on the Galveston project. Ryan Oster, who is our engineering director and city engineer, along with Dustin Elmore, who's in his engineer in his office, they're going to go through kind of how we got here, going all the way back to the original discussion that happened several years ago about the improvements on Galveston, the funding available that we have for the project, what the current task that council has asked them to do, what we're proposing to do. It's not going to be a formal presentation. We're actually just going to kind of walk through the project and have a discussion. And then Ryan's also going to outline kind of next steps and approach in terms of actually building some of these proposed improvements. So with that, Ryan, I'm going to turn it over to you.
So we printed off 20 of these, and this is really your opportunity to follow along as we talk if you wanted to see it in front of you. So I will hand them out until they're gone. If you could maybe share, that'd be great. Appreciate that.
There's something I can plug in.
So just want to say thank you for everyone showing up on a quick turn on the Mondays as well for this discussion.
Teams.
Can you send us?
It's pretty impressive.
Actually.
You have a cord that I can plug in?
Lisa's doing it. I have it. Just a second.
Can you load? There you go. Are you loading?
I need to get connected.
Okay. Cool. Since we're trying to load the presentation with the council, we're scheduled till 2:30.
Yeah.
Is everybody good on time?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. So as we're getting settled here, we'll try to keep the project update presentation maybe 30 to 45 minutes and hopefully give us another 45 minutes. Once we get to the public comment period, we do have a roll map. We'd be happy to lay this out if people want to come up and take a picture of the whole corridor as a whole from where we sit today. It is basically what Janet just handed out, just all connected into one. But we'll be going through these as a part of the presentation as we get Dustin connected. So I'll start off with just a little bit of a brief history before we jump into the design. So the Galveston Corridor project, as many in the audience may already know, what has been in development for over a decade now. So it originally evolved from a community-driven vision and then ultimately into kind of a city-sponsored infrastructure project. And at the end of the day, it's really meant to improve safety, mobility, and livability along this very vital piece of the city here on Galveston that I would put a nice circle around and say is very unique. It's got its own culture, it's got its own identity, and we don't want to lose that as a part of this project. So the project started taking shape back in 2014 when the city initiated some public engagement efforts, met with neighborhood associations, businesses, and there was even a technical advisory committee put together to help kind of navigate what this corridor should look like. So the goal was to really transform it into kind of a complete street concept that was safe for all users of the system, bikes, peds, and vehicles as well. In 2015, the council adopted a concept design that was basically a 3-lane configuration with kind of minimal treatments in the center medians due to all the turning movements into driveways, alleys, side streets, etc. So that concept was continued to be discussed for a couple years. And then in September of 2017, we got to a 30% design. So it took 2.5 years to go from 0 to 30, if not longer, a 30% design, which is a pretty lengthy period. And then during that window, the city also started setting aside some design funding. There was never construction money set aside at that point in time yet in the 2015 to 2017 timeframe, just some design funding as the city developed this design concept. Then in 2018 to roughly 2020, the project stayed kind of on the capital and project pipeline. But the concept continued to be developed, and as we were still trying to figure out what this was going to look like, we just kind of kept it as placeholders within the budget until we could get to kind of a future phase where we could get a good cost estimate of what that was going to be. So then the final design was ultimately completed in 2020. And that's what, if you jump onto the city's website today, that's probably primarily what you still see was the council adopted design from back in 2020. So it's 5 years old now. But that was the best guidance we had at the time, and that was the direction we were given. So that was the design of the project. And then from 2021 to 2023, went through some other budgetary and fiscal discussions. We were asked as staff to prioritize projects because of COVID. Weren't sure if there was going to be a downfall in revenue coming into the city. And unfortunately, Galveston was one of those projects that got continued to kind of just get pushed until we get to basically where we are today. So that final design concept was roughly an $8 million project, which included about $4 million in transportation improvements and another $4 million in utilities improvements underneath Galveston. So it's kind of a mini version of the Newport Corridor project. And I know I say that, I don't want to scare anybody. It's a mini Newport, but let me finish talking and then it'll sound better by the time I'm done. And so we never really had the budget in the utility fund to be able to do that work. Fortunately, over the last 5 years, you just heard of some inputs on the stormwater side and different things we can do that is different than what we had approached this with 5 years ago, as well as on the other utilities. We think we've got some workarounds. We can work parallel to Galveston and having this, instead of having to tear up the whole Galveston corridor for a deep water line or sewer line improvement. So we're working closely with our water services group to figure out ways to minimize the impact to Galveston. And so in the COVID era, like I said, it was delayed. There was about 4 million in the transportation fund, but 0 in the utility fund. And that kind of carried over through future council adoptions of the budget, stayed at about 4 million until we adopted the 25 through 29 5-year CIP. Council was looking for funding to help the Bend Bikeways program and a bunch of these other things that are of high interest. So we reduced that $4 million Galveston budget down to 2 million. So it's actually 2.15. So that's where we sit today. We got just over $2 million. And the refocus is this is really a safety first project. So in the last 6 months working with Dustin, we've tried to narrow the scope of this thing down, working closely with our transportation and mobility department, being cognizant of this larger transportation standards discussion that we're diving into. What you have in front of you now is a scaled down version that we believe we can complete for $2 million. And in a minute here, we'll just start at the 14th Street roundabout and we'll kind of do a walk, down the north side and then back down the south side of the corridor to kind of show everybody what we're talking about. But that's where we sit today. We've got funding between the next fiscal year, which starts here in about a week, rolling into the following fiscal year after that. And the proposed timeline as it sits today, if this is the concept we're going to move forward with, is, and I'll highlight, there's a lot of work that our internal city crews can get done out there, missing sidewalk gaps, making curb ramps ADA compliant, etc. But then there is a portion of the project that we would look to bid out to the contracting community sometime this late fall or winter. And that would be to build some of the center island medians, the raised crossing at 12th, and some other components that I'll get into. And hopefully that work could be bid out over the winter, initiated in the spring. And then in the summer of 2026, we have the Galveston identified from the bridge to the 14th Street roundabout is included in our street preservation program. So the whole street would get a 2-inch grind and inlay to get a nice new finished surface. And David and Janet are here if you want to hear more about what the timing of that would look like. But they've gotten really efficient with that in terms of working with our contractors. They can do that work in a matter of a couple evenings. based on what we've done in the past. So again, the whole focus here is safety, minimal impact to the businesses and the traveling public on the corridor, and to keep traffic flowing even while we're trying to get this thing built. So, if I could now, if there's any high level questions from council, happy to answer that. Otherwise, I can just dive right into the design and maybe take 20 minutes or so to kind of walk the corridor. Is that okay?
Do you want to go through the past plans to see
No,
how we
we'll-
got
no,
to where
we'll-
we are today?
No, we'll just,
Okay.
yeah, we'll just stick with what we've got proposed today. So, this is the cover sheet that everybody should have in their handout. It's the first one you'll see.
As
Yeah.
you're going through, would you mind pointing out, like what would be the self-performed work versus what
Absolutely.
would be bid
Yeah.
out versus?
Absolutely, yeah, happy to highlight that. So the cover sheet, for the non-engineers in the room, this is just how we break down our designs. This is the corridor overall, and then each accompanying sheet kind of breaks it down per a specific area with a lot more of the design details. And then toward the end of this, near the back of this thing, you have a proposed signing and striping legend that kind of shows you the widths of the bike lanes and the buffer, as well as the center island median or turn lane where it's gonna be maintained, and so forth. So, just starting, let's start up on the north end by 14th Street, on Galveston here. You can see a lot of it, you don't see any of the bold coloration. So the project coming out of the roundabout on the north side, and a lot of it's gonna basically stay the way it looks today. So existing sidewalks, existing crossing at the Galveston roundabout. The paving limits will land somewhere in there. We'll work that out with the street preservation team, in our transportation and mobility department, but we'll pave somewhere up to the limit of the roundabout, which is why the road itself is kind of a different color than the roundabout.
Yeah, you're just seeing the grinding inlay.
Yeah.
Of
Yeah.
basically from 14th to 13th.
I just want to add, this year, David, we're doing Galveston.
we're doing west of 14.
Yeah, so there is a street preservation project west of the 14th Street roundabout that's gonna occur this year.
And there's also, cities run up on the.
Yeah.
NSSP crossing there at 15th and then out.
And bikeways as well.
And bikeways.
Yeah, further down at Flag Line or something to slow speeds down before you enter into the Galveston corridor. So thank you for bringing that up. That's a good point. Before we dive too deep, taking a step back, Galveston is a corridor. We're really looking to do something up near Flag Line or 17th over there. As you transition from those deep, wide canyons into a residential area, definitely want to identify a way to slow speeds down somewhere over there. Then we have a pedestrian crossing as a part of our bend bikeways and key route system around 15th Street.
Which we'll be talking to you at the July
Yeah. that's
council
coming
meeting.
back
We'll give
at
you the
July
full,
council
we're gonna
meeting.
give you the full overview of the bin bikeways as well.
Mhm. And then the roundabout at 14th Street, a raised pedestrian crossing at 12th, which I'll describe here in more detail. And then some other crossings along the way on Galveston, and then ultimately likely a raised pedestrian crossing at Riverside to get you Riverfront, excuse me, from Riverfront over to Drake Park as a part of the Riverfront project or one of the other accompanying projects.
The Deschutes River.
It's the connection of the Deschutes River Trail to finally make that raised crossing through there. So that's a corridor approach that we're trying to tackle here as a staff. Most of that's already programmed in over the next couple years. So we'll continue to move forward with a lot of that. So now narrowing the focus back down onto Galveston. On the north side, you can see the first thing we're going to be doing is in front of 1314 Northwest Galveston. That's why the sidewalk is kind of hatched out right there. So that's a piece of existing sidewalk that we've identified that is either non-ADA compliant or just in bad shape and it needs to be fixed. Yeah, and if you've walked the corridor, you're going to be very familiar with some of these. Some of them are just in horrible shape, right? So there's a stretch of sidewalk on there we're proposing to rebuild. Stuff like that, Councilor Franzosa, is exactly what we would be looking for internal staff to do with our transportation and mobility department. I would put our internal crews, on par, if not better, with a lot of the contractors in town, and we can do it for a lot cheaper. So missing sidewalk portions, things like that, we're looking to self-perform. And then you get into the intersection there at 13th, and this is really where you're going to start to see some changes compared to what it is today. So every one of those corners is highlighted because every single one of those ramps is non-compliant today. So we need to make those ADA compliant. So we're tearing out those ramps, putting in new ramps, connecting back to the existing sidewalk the best we can. And then a key highlight is a pedestrian refuge island right there on the east side of 13th Street for a crossing there. That allows the pedestrians to only have to look one direction at a time. Then you can go out to the center island median. Then you can pause, you can look the other direction, and then you can get safely the rest of the way across Galveston. Then continuing to move to the east, you can see on the north side, there's another gap here, not a whole lot of improvements to be made to the existing condition. And then it gets a little bit more fun over here when we get to 12th Street. Or excuse me, we got Federal first, don't we? 12th and Federal, yeah, it changes names like most things in the city.
Yeah, and you'll notice too, when we kind of went through quickly, but this is Brother John's right here. Kind of like this little chunk of sidewalk here, the sidewalk along there is so obliterated that we felt, even though we removed the sidewalk from the scope of this project for the most part, the areas where it was basically just straight gravel, we are still proposing new sidewalk, which is why you're seeing some of the extra limits here.
So at 12th Street, again, non-compliant ramps. Where I've identified this as a key crossing location. It has a history of accidents with between vehicles and pedestrians through here. High volumes here due to the attractions of the different businesses around this corner. So what we're proposing, a little bit kind of talking into the earlier discussion about, what can we do now that's a little bit non-standard? We're proposing a raised pedestrian crossing here at 12th Street. And so that basically means as a pedestrian, if you're at sidewalk level, you would stay at the same level. You wouldn't ramp down to the street and cross and then ramp back up on the other side. You would stay raised. For the vehicles, it's going to act very much like a speed bump. It's just an elongated one. We have these around the city and other key locations in front of schools, in front of parks. We've built many of these as a part of our neighborhood street safety program. But we've identified this on the west side of 12th as being a key spot to not only keep the speeds down, but to provide a safe pedestrian crossing on the north to traverse north-south on Galveston.
Can I ask you to add a couple? Can you please add your discussions with public safety, especially fire around implementation?
Yeah.
As well as lighting as well.
Yeah. So anytime you put any type of obstacle, well-intended or not, into the right of way, it impacts our fire and EMS response times. So this is one that we've had a lot of sit-down meetings with our fire department. And they get the value. They understand slower speeds ultimately can make people safer. That's hopefully meaning fewer things you have to respond to. But if they're trying to travel down Galveston to respond to a heart attack or a stroke or something like that, we have to be cognizant that they're going up and over something. And if you're in the back of an ambulance, that's impactful. If you're trying to put an IV in, and my son's an ambulance operator with the city, and he can testify to this. If you're going up and over a speed bump or a raised crossing like this, you have to factor that into how you're treating the patients as you're going up and down and over these things. So there is an impact. It's not just all wonderful. This is the right answer. We want to be cognizant of there's trade-offs doing this kind of stuff. But we thought this was a good location, and the fire department, they understand what we're trying to do. They ultimately kind of bought off on this one on Galveston, just because they saw the benefit of the focus of this commercial area and the high draw of bikes and peds we get through here. But yeah, thank you, Russ, for highlighting that. It is a conversation we've had with our fire and EMS folks.
So just to clarify, so
Yeah.
13 won't have that, but it will have.
Correct. Just a standard kind of refuge island
Okay.
where you would walk
Got it,
down a
okay.
street level.
But 12th has. the
Yeah,
additional
and 12th is a raised
Okay.
crossing
Okay.
for bikes and peds.
Thank you.
Yep. So then continuing on the north side, again, between 12th and Federal, a lot of that's going to maintain. And then we get to Federal, where you're going to see some more ADA ramps and improvements, as well as we've identified an area here where we don't feel like there's a high demand for turning movement. So we have a longer pedestrian island, which also helps to slow speeds down. Again, this introduces another conflict for fire and EMS. If we can do this in narrow stretches that allows vehicles to get out of the way so they can come through, generally that's okay. We do want to be careful about not doing this in too long of a stretch where a vehicle might get stuck in front of a fire truck or an ambulance that's trying to get by and they have nowhere to go because there's a median and a curb. So again, trying to find that proper balance. But there is more traditional, to your point, Councilor Perkins, on both sides of Federal here, east and west. We've identified kind of a standard pedestrian refuge island, so not raised, but down at street level. So you can cross either side here at Federal. What this is going to do, though, is there's an existing kind of turn lane right there. So if you're making a left turn from Galveston, onto, left onto Federal or north onto Federal, instead of having a little turn lane to sit in, you are going to be sitting in the through lane. So you're going to have to wait for through vehicles to clear before you make that movement. Once again, this is going to add, a little bit to the congestion side. But the turning movements off of Galveston aren't so high that we feel like all of a sudden this is going to back up for 2 or 3 blocks. It'll back up for a little while, but there's enough gaps that we feel along Galveston that you can make those movements without causing, blocks and blocks of holdup. So yeah, more pedestrian crossings, more ADA ramps there on the north side as you cross Federal. And then crossing Federal down to Columbia, you can see there's some more ADA ramps and crossings there. Oh, I forgot to highlight. I'll hit it when I come back. There is some improvements going to the north up Columbia a little bit just to tie into the existing infrastructure. So some additional sidewalks and stuff right there by 1008 Northwest Galveston. But again, on the north side at this point, the proposal is mainly just ADA ramps and setting up the safe crossings. So to finish off on the north side now, we're going to get down to Harmon. There's been lots of historical conversations about what to do with the Harmon intersection. Everybody knows there's a lot of people that kind of shoot through this intersection, either moving north-south or south-north. Despite the signs that say don't do that, it happens. So we're proposing to build in some restrictions on the turning movements there. So if you're on Harmon and you're wanting to get onto Galveston, that's going to be a right-only turn. So you will not be able to turn left from Harmon onto Galveston, nor will you be able to cross Galveston from north to south on Harmon. And that's what's highlighted by the pedestrian refuge island, as well as that little extension that pushes to the east. That's like a ribbon curb that'll keep people from being able to make that north-south or south-north movement. So yeah, ADA ramps, a pedestrian refuge island, again, at grade with the vehicles. And then some additional sidewalk improvements as you enter onto the bridge, just to make sure that we're replacing the old and aging sidewalk through there. So jumping down now to the south side of Galveston, and we'll work our way back up the corridor. There's a major obstacle that exists today with that existing retaining wall. I think a lot of folks who have maybe walked that corridor know exactly what I'm talking about. If you got it, we'll just show a quick picture of that, of what that looks like. If you're on the south side of the bridge trying to walk on Galveston or the other way, you basically have to step into the road. So there is no sidewalk there. There's nothing right there other than stepping kind of out into this no man's land, and doing it as quickly as you can so that you can avoid a vehicle conflict there. So we'll show that picture here real quick. But the idea is that we need to bump that wall back to the right-of-way line. So right now that wall is well out into the public right-of-way, and we need to push that back so that we can build some type of connected system through there. You can see there's other obstacles. There's a power pole sitting right there. So we've got to be creative as we're coming off the bridge here in trying to make that connection over to Harmon. So that's one thing that council has highlighted, is they'd like to see us find a way to address that obstacle within our system. So that's going to be a big piece of this work. That's one of the components that we're likely going to put out to bid. We would have a contractor come out and do that work and get a nice wall design done. And obviously, we would need to work closely with the property owner through there. So, and then back to the design then, just a little bit more improvements as you turn the corner on Harmon right there. But then as you cross Harmon, then you're right into the improvements that were recently done by the gas station there. So that what you see in front of 981 Galveston at the gas station, with the wider shared use paths, that's the old design concept. So that 8 to 10 foot wide shared use path is what was in the 2020 design. And in the last 5 years, whether it's the gas station or in front of Sun River Brewing, those have been built to the old design concept. We basically said, congratulations, developer, here's what you have to build. And that's what they were required and got put into their land use. So what you see in front of 981 Galveston is already improved. We obviously don't need to do anything more in front of that stretch. Then you get back to the Columbia intersection. We've got some ramps there. You can see it's not on the southeast corner because those have already been rebuilt recently. So those are all compliant, but the ramps on the other side need to be rebuilt. Those are a little bit out of compliance, even though they're relatively new. But you can see we're not going to touch the on-street parking there. Again, that was the old design concept with the parking bays. So those will remain. And then you continue to walk to the west. You get back over here to Federal. We get back into the pet islands and the ADA ramps. I've already kind of hit on that, so I won't focus too much more. You can cross Federal, and then you're back to 12th. This is what I forgot to mention earlier. You can see some of the other improvements on 12th Street are what we call bulb outs. And so we're narrowing down the crossing distance for bikes and peds. So the existing curb is more of a kind of a straight shot through. And this is going to introduce some of those bulb outs. So it allows for a little bit better interaction as the bikes and peds are a little further out in front of things that they normally would be. And as vehicles are looking to make those turns on and off of Galveston and 12th, you're going to be a lot more visible as you make those shorter crossings.
Right, lighting enhancements. You talked about that too.
What's that?
Lighting.
Yeah, we'll get to that when we get to the signing and striping and other stuff. So, and then you're back to the raised crossing there on the south side, as well as Dustin mentioned, there's plenty of sidewalk work in front of Brother John's that needs to be redone right there because it's basically just gravel right now. So we'll come in and enhance that and fix that back up and make it match into the existing, sidewalk system that's through there. And then you keep moving west and you're over to 13th again. On the south side, just some crossings, ADA compliance, and making sure we've got a way to help folks get safely north-south across the corridor. And then you're back over to the roundabout at 14th Street. So,
And one other quick note is on those center islands, the other two being much longer. The other reason this one's shorter is because we have driveway access points we have to account for. And so that's the other two islands. There's no driveways off of Galveston in those areas, so we're able to elongate those.
And around those center islands, that'll be contractor work as well.
yes, yeah, so
Yeah.
good clarification. Anything we're doing from, on the road, from curb to curb, the center island refuges, the longer extended medians, the raised pedestrian crossing, that's all something we would likely bid out to contract and schedule that appropriately. Most of those, and we'll get into the signing and striping, and we can talk about lighting there as well. Portion of this design, which is page C 4.0 at the back of the packet. Anything curb to curb, we would likely be asking the contractor to come in and do. And then the striping work would be done in conjunction with the street preservation work. So this is where it could get interesting, and I think people will have varying opinions here. Is the proposed section here, because we're not really moving the curb lines other than at 12th Street where we're doing the bulb outs. Otherwise, the curb lines are basically staying where they're at. So we're basically going to take what we got curb to curb width, and we're proposing to do somewhere between a 4 to 5 foot bike lane with a 2 foot striped buffer, and then a 10.5 foot travel lane. And where we don't have the median or the refuge, would be an 11 foot travel lane to help maintain these turning movements. And I know delivery trucks sometimes have to park out there and other things. And then we mirror that on the south side with a 10.5 foot lane, 2 foot buffer, and a 4 to 5 foot bike lane. So that's going to look different than what it is today, where you have a single stripe and wider lanes. So it's going to feel narrower. That being said, we're cognizant of the fact that these striped buffers, after 6 to 12 months, that interior stripe basically disappears because everybody just drives on it. So we're looking into ways where we could further enhance that line without restricting the ability to turn into driveways and alleys and other things through there. So haven't landed on what the solution to that is yet. We've got examples around the city of things that we've done and tried. DuraCurb is one of them. That's what's on Wilson. We just opened Portland back up, which is just a long row of the vertical delineators. So there's different things we need to further explore as we kind of dive into what this is going to look like moving forward. But we do want to be cognizant of the safety, especially if we're not doing the wider shared use paths. We're basically telling the bikes to stay on the roadway, which means we need to enhance the safety of those bikes that are going to be traveling next to the cars in these narrower lanes. So in addition to what we've shown, and this has all been internal in-house design work to this point. So kudos to Justin for adjusting to the changes I'm throwing at him every day. But lighting is another key component of this. And it's not shown quite yet in the design. We're at about a 30% design concept now. You wouldn't really show that kind of work until you get to the 60 and 90% design drawings. But lighting will be incorporated into every single crossing that we do through this corridor. And I don't know if you've dove into that at all yet.
No.
Yeah, not yet. So, but we are cognizant that lighting is another thing that we would need to likely put out. A contractor would need to do that work because you're dealing with power. We would actually probably get an on-call engineering firm as well to help with the wall design and the lighting design, because that's more specialty work. So that's something we would utilize our engineering on-call contracts to just hire a firm or two to come in and help do the lighting design concepts as well as the wall design concepts.
Right, on the lighting, we're just keeping the lighting to these intersections.
Mhm.
Right,
Yeah.
it's not a complete corridor.
Just for the
lighting.
crossing.
Yeah, we're
It's
focusing on the crossings right now. Again, primarily because we've got a $2 million budget and we're trying to do everything we can to stay under that number. So that is the project as proposed today. I'm sure, this is multiple iterations of back and forth. I don't want to say that it's dramatically different than the previous one. We've just taken some of the previous design concepts out, but really still focusing on the crossings, the safety components, and making this thing as user-friendly as we can, while maintaining kind of the look and feel of Galveston, and trying to figure out a way to integrate, the high demand that we see from the bike ped community, as well as this obviously continues to be a high volume of vehicle traffic that navigates up and down Galveston.
And I'll just add a couple extra things. This still allows for the flexibility as redevelopment occurs on the corridor to put additional parking bays and things in kind of in alignment with that original concept. But we're not going in and kind of reconstructing the whole corridor. Other conversations, and I may ask Janet just to highlight this as well. One of the components we were trying to do is trying to get a complete multi-use path system through this corridor. That will not happen with this project. That was on the north side, right?
Yes.
Janet?
Side, pretty much have a separated path from the forest to around 17th Street. And then the rest of the way to the DRT. So this is the one gap. So we're asking folks to use the street, either Galveston or we're building the Greenway on Hartford.
Yeah.
Or the other options to the south, but it'd be a gap.
Yeah, and just to reiterate that, because I didn't hand Janet the mic, but this is basically this stretch of Galveston. We have identified the need between the bridge and the 14th Street roundabout and a little further up. This is really going to be the only gap in the system that doesn't have that wider shared use path. Like she said, from the river to the forest is a good notion, is that once you get on either side of this, you really are on a more shared use, much more friendly corridor that helps you navigate this east-west movement.
We would try to continue to build that over time as redevelopment occurs and or additional funding becomes available to and prioritize to complete that system.
So, anything I missed from a kind of where we sit design wise today?
Yeah, maybe the one other thing to just kind of note is the original design had 5 foot bike lanes. But since the project is no longer proposing to redo the curbing's actually about a foot to 6 inches in from where we would want it to be with a full build out. And so our bike lanes are actually narrowed a little bit more than they would be if this was fully built out. But you'll notice that the ADA ramps currently for this 30% concept, the curbs are aligned to where we want them to be, but you'll notice that there's multiple 10-foot transitions here where we're going back in to tie into the existing curb by about 6 inches to a foot, I think is the widest part. So the concept there being when we build these ramps, if we rebuild the corridor with whether it's private improvements or a future project, these ramps should be able to remain and we shouldn't have to rip these out to build the corridor. They're in the correct location. But because of that, our proposed bike lanes are going to be narrower than they would be typically.
And just kind of tying back to the first presentation too, Ryan, because one of the things we are not doing on this corridor that we're planning was a significant stormwater improvement too, because this is we do have a storm drain system that does collect water on this corridor and discharge to the river. So similar to kind of what happened on Newport, we want to put additional treatment and outfall protections to that, as well as actually some low impact development, concepts on the corridor, similar to what you see on Newport, but we do not have the budget to do that. So all of that storm drain system work is not included in what is being shown here.
Yeah, right now, all we're thinking for storm is any incidental inlets that are affected by some of those bulb outs. We're going to be building over a couple of inlets, so we'll have to relocate those, but we weren't planning any new improvements.
So, I think that's about enough for me for now. Happy to take council questions.
Yeah, can I also just read, if you do want to comment for the audience, if you could please fill out a comment form and hand it to Michelle. That way she knows that you.
It might be interesting, maybe we open this up now for council
Yeah.
comments
Is
before
that
we.
okay if we listen
or
to
for
everybody
public
and then
comments?
ask all our questions?
Oh, I
Okay,
think
great.
that's great.
All right.
So, Michelle, can you give Megan the.
Start calling people up. And then it looks like we have our little clock up if we wanted to do that. And you could just, well, you can't really see it from over there.
There's dots I can see.
Oh yeah, you can see the dots. Because we're gonna have you come up, we'll just call you up and you can come up to this microphone right here. And you have 2 minutes. And let's start with David Green.
Good afternoon, councilors. I'm David Green. I do live in Bend. I use the Galveston corridor extensively on a bike primarily, and occasionally walk it. This is going to be a pretty big improvement over what we have now. I really appreciate the council's or the staff's looking at this in a corridor approach rather than the typical project approach that we've seen for many years. But looking at this from all the way from essentially the end of Skyliner through the bridge is a really big improvement. They've made a start at slowing traffic on this corridor. That's the largest problem on this corridor. The speed of traffic through there is frightening for people on bikes. The new crossings, especially west of 14th, are going to start to slow traffic if those get built. And the idea of a raised crossing at Riverfront is going to change the flavor of the corridor dramatically for drivers. I am still a little bit concerned that just the crossings are not going to be enough to slow traffic to really make it comfortable to bike. But I'm certainly hoping that it will, and I'm really interested to see how drivers react to this, because it's still going to look pretty wide with the 10.5-foot lanes plus the 11-foot center lane plus the bike lane, which looks like a traffic lane to most drivers. So I am concerned about that, but I think this is a really big step forward, and I hope we can get this done. So thanks.
All right.
And then we have Kevin Collins next. And you still have time to sign up if you would like.
I think I have my questions answered. I'm a business owner in Galveston, so thank you for the invite. We have not had a great amount of communication in regards to the process, so that's number one. Love to see that the more reaching out to us small business owners that are represented here and get us in the loop. And I know you had a 10-year process, and we had some designated representative that obviously did a nice job on it. So secondly, this looks to me like I'm happily surprised as to what I'm seeing, so thank you. I know it's a budget issue as much as anything else, but we've had some struggles as small business owners, obviously, through multiple revenue blockers for us, so to speak. But this seems to me like a great balanced approach to getting the bike community, a safer walking community, and then having us being represented and the budget being within line what we'd like to see. So I understand that you have less money, you have a lower revenue cycle moving forward. I struggle to see how we continue to build roads that are massively more expensive to both build and then maintain down the road when you have a declining funding mechanism. So this strikes a good balance with me, so thank you.
Thank you. And then we have James Teeter.
Thanks for listening to me, having me. I thought this was a Q&A. I didn't prepare like a minute to say it. I thought like you guys would respond. So I'm a little disappointed that there's some miscommunication there between us. But I have a lot of thoughts. I could talk for a long 2 minutes.
We can't do Q&A. I mean, we're not stuck on this at all.
Yeah.
You can ask questions. We're not, this is not a,
Not strict, we were just trying to figure out the best way to navigate the conversation, but we can receive feedback and then it's up to.
and anyone in here can do the same.
I guess, and also stepping back, I work with Fend Bikes, and I don't want to speak for the whole organization, but definitely a lot of us would like to see the Bend Bikeway corrected to travel down Franklin and Galveston, and we don't want to see the design here limit that from being a future revision that happens. And so I appreciate the conversation about how there's a great, nice shared use path on both ends of this corridor, and I agree it's a unique corridor for pedestrian activity. But I personally drew up a design this weekend of a two-way bike lane on one side of the street, and it worked out pretty good. So I would say that the city should at least conceptually look at it before full-blown moving away with this design. I don't think this is a bad design. I'm fundamentally opposed to any non-protected bike lane on collectors and arterials. I think that allowing our children to move through the entirety of our city is more important than left turn movements. I think you could restrict a lot of access to these local streets either in or out with very cheap methods, with a sign and a precast piece of concrete in the street that just doesn't let them go that way. And that 11-foot middle turn lane, I mean, the 32-foot width for vehicles compared to the 44 width of the street is just out of proportion with how we should be balancing, you know, the future of our city for our children and our climate. And so dirt curb at a minimum, I'd like to see those posts on each side of the pedestrian walkways so that pedestrians feel like they have some protection from the bikers too. You know, these e-bikes they're not the acoustic bikes. If you get hit by an e-bike, that hurts. And we need to really start thinking about our e-bikes as you know, things that are going to move us forward in a climate perspective, but they shouldn't be on our sidewalks. They don't mix with pedestrians the way that slow lightweight bikes do. And so I would like to see a lot more dirt curb. The raised crossing, I think, also deserves a refuge island. I've seen that many other places. Engineers I've talked to in Canada say that this raised crossing parallel with the street, so perpendicular to the way you're showing it, but that's not that much more expensive than doing all of the details of these curved bulb outs and ramping your ADA ramp down into the street. But if you just keep that sidewalk high and keep it straight, formwork's easy. There's a lot of advantages, just everyone understands the priority of the street that way. So there's a lot of critiques I have to this. I think that there are things that can be done in a very cost-effective way. So I think you can tell, I could talk for, I'm sorry, I talk very much.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
I would really love, I've seen in other cities, I think people call them armadillos. Is that?
That's the name.
The Zikla product. And it's different than Duracurb because there's space apart, which I really like because if I'm a cyclist and I feel a little bit more aggressive, I can get out of the bike lane and go back. But I'm just curious if you have any thoughts on that. And then also, I hope you'll send your design to Council All just so we can see it because I'm love to geek out like you did.
I mean, if I've got a 4-foot bike lane and a 10.5-foot car lane right beside me, Armadillo doesn't mean anything to me. I've biked through San Luis Obispo, which uses Armadillos extensively, and they have a pretty wide buffer where they use them. And they use them diagonally more as a way to limit turning movements so that the cars can turn over them. If they do, they're gonna hit them. But it really is intended so that if a car and a bike or a pedestrian do have an encounter, that's happening at a slow enough speed that everyone's okay. It's how I've seen Armadillos used effectively.
Yeah, definitely on slower traffic, slower speed streets.
I would love to hear if there's any other businesses on Galveston. I would love to hear from you too. If there are any questions you have, yeah, come on up if you don't mind.
Sorry, I showed up late. I didn't know I was supposed to.
That's okay.
Okay, so I showed up late. Someone just told me that it's scheduled for spring of 26.
So we would be doing kind of sidewalk, curb ramp work, hopefully this year.
Okay.
And then the contractor would be coming in to do the wall lighting and then the center island work in the spring of 26.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then I also understand that this originally had like the storm drain.
Yeah.
And now we've lost that.
Mhm.
So is that still anticipated to happen?
Not in the near term, maybe in another 10 to 20 years.
5 years.
Yeah.
So my business is like 75% of our seating is outside.
Mhm.
So we make all of our money. We like stay afloat in the winter. We make up all of our money in the spring. So I own 3 bars, and like my experience is when someone says they'll be done by June, then they're done in December. So that's my biggest concern as a business owner is like if I lose a summer, I lose my business.
Yeah. And so just to reiterate, the goal is to absolutely minimize impact to the business on the corridor. So when we're doing sidewalk work in front of Brother John's, that shouldn't, like, the businesses can still operate how it would before. There will be some impacts to the vehicular traffic when we do these center island medians, but we're gonna do everything we can to still maintain, you can cut that out, you can pour those all under traffic. We might just have to have some flaggers on either end, but we're not looking to close Galveston except for maybe for an evening or two.
Okay, cool.
When we repave the whole thing.
But that would be my big question is that the road is not going to be shut down.
No, our goal is to not close Galveston. Yeah.
Thanks.
When you do the grind and inlay, then will that be, you'll do like the north half and then the south half, or that'll be a full road closure, won't it? When that happens?
Yeah.
It'll be fully closed at night.
It'll be night work.
Oh, great.
Maybe not full closure, maybe one side,
Okay.
but it'd be night work. We'll come back up during the day.
Mhm.
We would do all the grinding. Might take a night or two and then come back in and pave it. Get it all paved.
Great.
And then there'd be the striping that would come in. Striping would be probably some daytime work and maybe lane restrictions, but not full closure.
So when you say night work, what time would that be? Obviously at night.
Yeah.
10 o'clock to 6 p.m.
We can work with business owners on that to try to minimize impacts to 8, 9, 10 o'clock till be out of there 6, 7 in the morning type. That's what we've done. We've done that same type of schedule all across town because we need to get the road back open usually for the morning commute. That's
I have another question about, kind of, I don't know if any of the business owners can speak to this, but, one thing I notice on Galveston is, delivery trucks will park in that center like turn lane, and that's literally how businesses get goods. Yeah, and that, so I think that's, something that's really essential to kind of manage. So I just want to make sure that, that the way the islands, the refuge islands are designed right now kind of takes that into account. And there, an alternative, would be potentially, there's only a couple on-street parking bays. I've seen in my old neighborhood in a different city, I know that we restricted on-street parking on certain blocks, in those early morning hours, at least, so the delivery trucks had a place to stop to do their drop-offs and pickups and whatnot. So anyway, yeah, just curious if delivery trucks, the larger delivery trucks.
I know,
need to bring that up.
I think this council's word too. I mean, I think parking management strategies outside of this direct conversation, that's one of the areas that'll probably be looked at
Mhm.
in the upcoming years for sure as densification occurs down there.
Well, and also people trying to, particularly coming off of some of those alleys, like whipping into the middle lane because they're just been waiting so long to try and turn left or right. Like that's another thing you have to think
Mhm.
about. It's super dangerous,
Mhm.
particularly for everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we're also trying to maintain access to all the existing driveways that are out there.
Oh, yeah, of
and-
course,
And through redevelopment, those will eventually probably get pulled away but that's a very long-term plan. So we want to make sure we maintain access to everybody too.
I would chime in on that. I think the managed parking element is easy to do now that we're set up and
Yeah.
it would be easier going forward. I think we'd like to get some more information from the businesses
Yeah.
in the community.
When do
Initially,
need it?
we're finding, especially because we're a little bit of a remote location, like the timing of deliveries may not always be
Yeah.
clear, so having a plan B.
Yeah.
But certainly.
Yeah. Yeah, please.
didn't get signed up.
We're just free for all. Have a good free for all.
So I'm Jim Elliott. I'm with Ben Bites, but my reason I'm here today is because I work with a lot of kids who would like to travel independently to school. And I think this is gonna offer them a better way. Because some of our streets in town are like walls. I don't know if you've ever walked, but people don't stop. If you're gonna if you're a pedestrian.
Yeah, we'll just
And
keep
so there are
going.
lots of kids that live on the south side of Galveston who'd like to go to Highland,
Mhm.
who would like to go to West Side Village, who can't do that now, and so their parents drive them, and so then what does that recur, what occurs then? 2 times a day, we got lots of extra cars, because parents don't feel comfortable even walking their kids, and I have a grandson that goes to Highland. And a lot of his friends live on the south side of Galveston. And he bikes to school some, and he's better now because he's done a lot of good things on Portland. It's slowed down things. And he does that same thing in Galveston. He's got friends that are gonna, instead of their parents driving them, are gonna bike themselves, or gonna walk themselves. And in the end, that's how I got to school. And a lot of you people with gray hair, and even some of you don't have gray hair, probably got yourselves to school. You didn't have your folks drive you. And the school pickup and drop off lines, it's frightening. I'm a crosswalk guard. So anyway, so thank you.
Mhm.
I know you don't hear me say thank you, right?
No, I appreciate that. And I'm gonna hold on to that one for a while.
Can I ask? I missed Milan. I am curious if you looked at putting a raised crossing on the west side of Columbia and if that was feasible. I feel like, and the reason I ask that is because I feel like that stretch, like coming off the bridge,
Yeah.
traffic just kind of tends to
I think
really speed up there.
The
And
two
feel
busiest
like,
crossings are the Columbia Crossing and the 12th Crossing.
Yeah, and I've heard of pedestrians, well, I always see pedestrians trying to cross Columbia and they just can't do it. And so I wondered if a raised crossing there was feasible and if that would maybe help make it an easier place for pedestrians to cross.
Short answer would be no, just because of the on-street parking there. That you wouldn't be able to physically get ramps up and down to do a raised crossing there without a big modification to that on-street parking, which is one of the few only on-street parking we have there. If you look kind of like on 12th, just to be able to get up 6 inches, build a flat top that's 8 feet wide and go down 6 inches, you're looking at, something that's 12 to 15 feet wide. And you just physically can't fit it there in Columbia. So we did look at a bunch of different locations to where we could do these raised crossings, and based off of the one proposed with the park project and then one more to the west. 12th was kind of the main crossing that was feasible to build it physically and was part of worked with our system. So we did look at multiple locations, but we decided on 12th just due to those factors. If we tried to do something on Columbia, we'd likely have to remove that on street parking.
You said west side of Columbia though, right?
Yeah.
Is there a reason why you prefer west side and not east side?
I think there's a higher level traffic that's crossing on the west side than on the east side. I see a lot going
By
from lot,
Bosa.
going from like kind of
Right?
where the lots on the west side to those businesses on the west side.
Yeah, and like Ryan noted too, with us meeting with fire, they were okay with us pursuing these on a corridor type aspect, but they really wanted to limit the raised crossings too, due to the same reasons that Ryan brought up. Although I will say, in my opinion, they had a bigger issue with the islands than they did the raised crossings, just especially on this corridor due to nowhere for people to go if they start flashing their lights. So if anybody stops because of a lights being flashed, they're at a deadlock and they can't get through this road. And this, we always got to remember Galveston is an arterial. It's meant to be a big movement of vehicles in the city.
Yeah.
This is a very, very unique arterial due to speeds, due to businesses, due to everything. But it is, a thing that fire is very keen to and watching on this project because it's really limiting their east-west access on the city by us doing some of these improvements. So need to continue having those coordination conversations.
Ryan, I know you told me before about like for the Franklin sections, like 12,000 cars, right?
Yeah,
Is that what you-
yeah, Franklin.
How,
we were
how,
the
how,
15.
do you know, like how many
The
cars?
volumes
Any idea?
on Galveston?
Galveston?
I don't off the top of my head, but we'll look it up. Janet, do you happen to?
Just curious, I'm just curious.
Well, no, I honestly couldn't tell you off the top of my head. I can't remember what it is. It's more than it was 10 years ago. I know that.
Yeah. When I already emailed Janet a while ago because I live near there and moving that slow down thing, what like the end of Skyliner to the beginning of that residential neighborhood, moving that to the beginning of the residential neighborhood where it used to be in the middle of the residential neighborhood has made a massive impact on my speed. I know because I'm like, oh gosh, time to slow down. Time to slow down. 2025. Yeah.
If they just enforce that.
That's a
Would that be dramatic?
Yeah.
You ticket people for not stopping at crosswalks.
Can you ticket someone for not stopping in a crosswalk?
Yeah.
I know telling if you people gets heads turning. So I have one more question if I can.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, come on up.
And it's for-
If you wouldn't mind, yeah.
Yes,
that's
if anyone's listening in, they can
It's just
hear
about
better.
the bulbs, like on 12, you have those bulbs there, that's a right turn lane for a lot of commercial trucks.
It is, yeah.
And 10 rows, they put in probably 3-4 beer trucks a day there. If you put one truck in that, where the bulb there, that stops traffic both ways.
Yeah.
So now you basically put a blockage there. Is it because of the raised walkway that you're doing the bulbs there? Or is it just you guys decided to put the bulbs in there to slow traffic?
Just as narrow the crossing for the pedestrians.
Okay, because we have trucks coming in for Keith's business, for Adams, for mine.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's a really good
Anybody in the
point.
alleyway, it's a delivery corridor, so. If there's any thought on that at all, would be just to eliminate that, so it's not just one truck or one car, and of course, we do have, like he said, there's lack of reinforcement. On that area that's yellow right there for parking.
Yeah.
So if someone parks there, then it's almost anyway, especially on both sides. So maybe just look at the bulbs disappearing there to give us a little bit more flow with the trucks at daily, which are literally 6 days, if not 7.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I appreciate that. We've all driven through those bulbed outs and it's sometimes even uncomfortable for 2 regular cars
Yeah,
to get through
absolutely.
those. So I recognize that. This was really intended to make like, this is to say 12th Street is where we want you to cross. But no, I appreciate that comment
And
of
with
the left.
snow in there, with snow in there too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It becomes really beautiful.
Yeah. Okay.
Come on.
Hello, my name is Michelle Rhodes and I'm the active transportation coordinator with Ben Lapine Schools. And I want to thank Jim Elliott for standing up and saying thank you, because I want to say thank you also for the improvements that are in front of us, because in addition to Highland School, there's also West Side Village School in that vicinity. And my role is new with this school system. It's to help promote students walking and rolling to school. And any of these kinds of improvements will help with that flow and help create the visual impact that will ideally help slow those speeds down and let people know that people are trying to get there another way. So I would also encourage the look at the speed in those areas as well. It's always going to be a factor, as well as the crosswalks. So thank you again for these improvements. It will help our flow to and from those schools, not only for the students that are attending those schools, but also we, as a school system, we use collector points to have students walk to a school and get picked up by their school bus to go elsewhere across the community. So that's part of the rolling of walking and rolling to school is actually riding the school bus as well. So anytime we can help that movement is very appreciated and needed. Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle. Janet, I know we've talked about like added enforcement and speed studies. It seems like we already know, right? And so but can we request that we have, increased presence from the police department to just slow people down for, remind them the speed that they're supposed to be going, what they're supposed to be doing on that road? Or
We can do that, and I think we're getting with everything else that they're doing, as you well know that conversation, but I think this is something we can work with them on targeting, like as we're opening in certain periods to really reinforce it. Like, as we're, just doing this project that kind of separate, maybe that in the beginning of schools, right? So
Yeah,
beginning of
yep.
school, we'll do schools
It always
and
helps.
some- in the summer, maybe.
You see that car and you start thinking.
Yeah, and they've done a couple like specific crosswalk specific things, so to speak. And our police wants people to do the right thing, so you'll see them advertised before they do it.
Sure.
Which is
Fun.
make sure you're doing the right thing. Well, and surprisingly, they still
Yeah.
catch people.
Yeah.
They never have to pull away the ticket to people looking at it.
Yeah.
Justifiably.
I think on that point, I appreciate the comment about, can we enforce the speed limits? And I do tend to think that people in general want to do the right thing, and that includes things like drive the speed limit and stop for people who are trying to cross. And the challenge is that it's so easy to do the wrong thing. We look down and suddenly you're
Yeah.
like, oh my gosh,
I'm
I'm
going
going 30
35,
or
yeah.
25, or oh shoot, I didn't see that person that was trying to cross back there. So my question is whether this might be a candidate for designation as like a business district where we have a goal of a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit. And then we come up with the built environment that cues drivers to actually drive what is the safe speed limit that reflects its use. In this case, it moves a lot of vehicles, but also happens to be a really important, vibrant, commercial corridor as well. So is there a possibility of doing something like that?
Ryan, I can take that one.
Yeah.
That's something I can work with Dustin and Ryan on to setting that up. Because we do have
So
an option.
when
We
we-
haven't used it yet. That is an option.
And so when we do these, if we have raised crossings and we have narrower lanes, I would be interested also in following up on the question of, we have Portland Ave open, which is great. And it would be nice to have a comparison just of the lane widths and the bike lane widths there. I know Portland obviously doesn't have the two-way turn lane in the center, but just to get a kind of an existing built environment that people might go and experience. Oh, this is what, I don't know if Portland is 10.5 feet.
10, it's narrower.
Okay, so Portland's actually narrower than what this would be.
Qualitatively, it seems like the speeds on Portland have dropped since we've opened it.
That's my
Oh, yeah.
impression too.
That's what I've noticed.
So do we have a target speed limit in mind when we build these traffic calming
I mean, like
installations?
Center Island medians and raised crossings, the goal, it's not like by doing this, it will without a doubt make people go 20 miles an hour. Putting things like this within the right of way, and it's a cart before the horse kind of thing. If we did a speed study out there today, it'll say, 25 to 30 is what it should be, because that's what 90% of people are doing. So we actually have to go build something that will force people to slow down. And then you go do the speed study and it will support the fact that, oh, now the average speed is 20 to 25.
I see what
So
you're
now we can go post that appropriately. So it's a, you know, the E's, right? The engineering, the education, and the enforcement. So it's a combination of all of those that I think to get to that target goal.
Given the comments on the bulb outs too, I was intrigued by the previous comment about parallel raised crossings. I think the intention was as an alternative to a bulb out, but is that something that we've considered, or, you know, maybe a whole raised intersection instead of just a raised crossing?
Yeah, those are all options on the table. The deeper you get into that, the more you start dealing with things like stormwater runoff.
I see.
And dealing like, does the water go from Galveston to the side street or the side street to Galveston? And even with the one raised crossing we're doing, we got to reconfigure kind of the drainage pattern to make sure we're capturing it all, so you don't get a big, nice frozen pond in front of one of these. So those are all certainly options that we could explore if council would like us to,
But
but
not for $2 million.
so that's where I get a little hesitant to say if we start doing all that, which are all good things, like there's nothing wrong with any of those. But if you're gonna say do like a raised crossing or do parallel crossings at all or some of these, it just adds to the cost and.
And then you did
timeline.
mention the crossing at Riverfront, that is, you're including that in the work for this.
Not as a part of this project,
Not
no.
as part of this.
That is a part of a separate project that Janet's team is running, the Riverfront project. And so I'm sure she could give you some better
Yeah,
updates on that.
whenever Riverfront gets reconstructed, that would be the time you probably put that crossing in, correct? That's what we're looking at, isn't it?
Yeah,
Design is covered, no.
there's no construction
Right.
funding for that. Again, it's always a funding question. So yeah, ultimately though, Riverfront raised crossing, 12th raised crossing, sprinkled pet ed refuge islands all throughout it, 14th Street roundabout. We've got a Ben Bikeways crossing at 15th and then a neighborhood street safety crossing somewhere at 17th or Flag Line or something over there.
Then this, I guess I'll have to answer that as we're wrapping up here, is that I think that this would be an option where we might have some quick build elements where the
Mhm.
project's coming, maybe that, you know, the raised crossing in the way we want it, we're not able to build, but you could do some speed humps. Put speed cushions in those locations to get
Right, yeah.
to get the same effect in the interim.
Well, I recognize that it doesn't include, I think what, you know, there's some things that it doesn't include, but for the price tag.
Yeah.
This is pretty
A lot of bang
phenomenal
for your
work.
Yeah, so I'd like to just check in with council too, because as we, and Ryan, maybe just reiterate kind of next steps from here and what your plan of attack is.
Yes.
Just to make sure that, do you want us to do an open house, like, how much more
Mhm.
engagement would you like us to have? Because we really need to get to the final answer and get moving on this, especially if we're gonna start getting some crews out there, so.
Yeah, so at this point, from a design standpoint, this is where it's like, do I give Dustin the green light to proceed? Bring on the wall engineers and the lighting engineers and really take this thing to a final design. Ideally, we can do that throughout the summer and into the fall. In the meantime, a lot of these ADA curb ramps and other stuff, we can start working with Janet and David and their teams to start kind of programming that into their work over the fall and into the winter. But yeah, the big question, I appreciate that, is, you know, how much additional engagement are you seeking us to have with, I mean, I love the turnout here. This is a
Yeah.
great sign. And so do you want us to continue this conversation at the 60% design and then the 90% design? Or do you feel comfortable enough to just take this thing to final and keep moving? You know, there'll be other questions that come up along the way, of course, but you know, we can, you know, short of doing a 2-year long, you know, advisory committee, you know, I really want to get this off of my to-do list. If I want it done right. So if we need to do some public engagement, we can start that now. And we're happy to do so. But then the question ultimately comes down to, if we start to feel like the public and the businesses and the neighborhood association are really leaning a different direction than what we're proposing, then how much back and forth do we want to have? We can always come back to another community building subcommittee meeting and have a similar conversation, but I want to give our team the ability to move forward and get this designed so we can get something out to bid end of the year.
I guess I would just ask, personally, I don't feel like another public engagement meeting needs to happen. I feel like what you're proposing here really this is almost quick build. Minor modifications or ADA improvements at, painting crosswalks or, but what I would ask is that the website be updated.
Absolutely, yeah.
So that is,
Yeah.
and folks can see what's going on, and
Yeah, we will,
Dustin's email will probably be on the website.
well, yeah, we'll definitely get these design concepts posted. We'll get rid of some of the old information. We'll put an updated timeline on there. And yeah.
And then
We-
I guess one caveat would be that if anything changes, as you know, you go through engineering, if something has to change and that, requires a little bit more public notice, that would be the one.
But I just tangentially, I'd just like to also just give kudos to Dustin, because he's been piloting this in-house design concept, and this is a perfect example of where this has worked really well and it's been very nimble and dynamic. So we're going to continue to look at these are the right type of projects to use in-house engineering. Not only from cost, but also just kind of nimbleness and kind of vetting different ideas and concepts. So
Yeah, this isn't the first concept.
Well, that was one of the questions I had in my notes is, are there any direct guidance from council based on feedback you've heard?
Yeah,
That
that
was a big.
concerns me. Yeah, that concerns me.
So look at other, to get rid of the bulb outs on 12th. Look for other areas to try to incorporate design safety options. Look into something more than just paint in the bike buffer.
Yeah.
So those are all things that I think we still need to investigate further, but if you have any
Yeah.
direct guidance now, we can.
Yeah, I mean, just picturing it in my head and picturing a beer truck sitting, yeah, I just, it's.
Yeah, I think this is
concerns me.
this doesn't represent such a fundamental shift from the process that has occurred before that I think warrants, another round of extensive engagement. I do think it's important to have to work with the businesses to make sure that there is a traffic flow plan for things like deliveries so that that's accounted for. So I don't know that I could give any direction specifically about saying, oh, we should eliminate these bulb outs or keep them without following up on that. So I think that's important to do. But I think, otherwise this has been very, very helpful.
And just as a quick overview, there are the bulb outs here on 12th. There's obviously this one here on Harmon that we're also narrowing. But one that's not very clear is the reason we're rebuilding so much of this length here on Columbia is that the curb line, you can kind of see the hatching here. The curb line's actually back here. And so we are narrowing this whole stretch of Columbia also. And that one's not very clear if you're not switching back and forth between the existing conditions. So those are the 3 locations where we are narrowing the widths of the side streets, just so everybody's aware.
I would just encourage particularly any businesses that are here on Galveston to not speak now, forever hold your peace, but now is the time, if there are some unintended consequences, like what was brought up today. Great. Oh, got a bunch of people to that. Come on up.
Yeah, come on up.
Yeah, come on.
My name's Fred Nickel and I live in the area, and all I have is questions. What is this project, the design traffic volume designed for? Do you have a maximum?
We don't have traffic counts.
Yeah, I mean, so this, like, as Dustin alluded to, this is a very non-traditional arterial street. So saying we're going to design this as an arterial for 20,000 vehicles a day is not a realistic target because of the environment out there. So it's the volumes are going to be what they're going to be. And, in 10 or 20 years, is it going to be a lot busier? Absolutely. But there's not a target ADT that we're trying to hit with these improvements.
Okay, I just looked up on the internet, according to the information I had on 2021. 17,500 vehicles use that every day. It didn't seem like anybody knew that.
Yeah, I didn't have that number off the top of my head, but no, thank you for bringing that up. Appreciate it.
Okay, and how does I presume that's at 35 miles an hour.
It's 25.
Well, but that's not what they drive. Well.
Yeah, but the speed limit is 25. Yeah.
Yeah.
I understand that. So how does that affect it when you reduce the speed to 20 miles an hour? How does that affect the volume?
Well, speed usually doesn't change the volume.
I beg to differ.
So the same number of cars typically, unless they decide to go a different route. But I don't think you're gonna have like a reduction of vehicles taking Galveston because the speed may slow down.
Okay, so I don't think you answered my question, though. What is the design for? Is it designed for 20,000?
I think, I mean, number of vehicles?
Yeah.
Yeah, again, so we're not designing like a blank canvas of an arterial here to say our goal is. It is correct, but it's a very unique arterial, maybe a carryover from the old system within the city. So I don't have a target number to say I'm trying to get 20,000 cars down here with a travel time of, 60 seconds between the bridge and the 14th Street
I'll
roundabout.
also say the controlling factor on this corridor is really the roundabout. And the signals, that's really what controls.
You're exactly right.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It controls and eliminates almost all access coming down Galveston. Because once that, during high traffic volume, that roundabout acts as a regulator.
Mhm.
It spits them out one right after the other and makes all the on roads coming onto that almost useless for a period of about an hour in the morning and an hour in the evening. To stay in the same, I just noted that what's the daily bike count for that street? Does anybody know?
Would be a lot higher for the saver.
Yeah, not off the
think
top of my
that's
head.
the
I couldn't give
problem.
you the bike volumes.
Well, I agree with, would be a lot higher, it was a lot safer. But I just wondered if you're designing for X amount of cars, how many bikes are you designing it for?
Yeah, we typically don't have like, we want 1,000 bikes a day. We don't design shared use paths and bike lanes for a
Okay,
volume of bikes. It's more of a safety question than
What is the
volume.
bulb out, right? I too didn't understand what the bulb out on 12th Street was for.
Yeah, it's intended so that
It
pedestrian,
usually slows traffic down. but-
it does. And it also creates a narrower crossing distance. So the pedestrian is spending less time in the roadway.
And also think about if those curb ramps were pulled back to where the standard street width is, you're looking sometimes down parked cars, you have blocked visibility, this puts you out further kind
And
of.
I agree with that. That totally works a lot better for the pedestrians, but since
Mhm.
12th isn't a very high volume street, it would seem that it would be on Galveston rather than 12th, but you already have the traffic, the pedestrian crossing there, which I'm sure is needed there for sure. And I guess that I was just, my last note here is I'm just surprised that we didn't hear what the volume was, this design was for. I mean, if we're gonna design it for 13, I heard somebody say 13,000 and there's already 17.
Yeah, that was an old reference.
That
We
was
were
the
talking
Frank-
about to volumes on Franklin and
Didn't make any
Greenwood.
sense.
Right, so yeah, understood. The 13,000 was volumes on Franklin and Greenwood.
Right.
Appreciate you bringing up the 17 and a half. I know we had the data. I just didn't have that number off the top of my head.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Fred.
Anyone else for last? Who has, yeah, you haven't gone yet. How about? Sorry to point. I don't know your name.
Who have we not heard?
Who have we not heard from in class?
I'm Renee Raymond. I'm with Mother's Juice Cafe. I have a couple of questions just on, and I may have missed this. You're gonna do this in sections of the road, is that correct?
So what do you?
Remodel in sections?
Well, so there's primarily, I guess we could say 3 phases to this. There's behind the curb line, there's curb to curb, and then the overlay of the whole street sometime in the street pres program next year.
But
Yeah,
as far as like the sidewalk and redoing the
like the ramps and
the
everything.
ramp
Yeah,
to make them ADA compliant, cause it's right in front of our building.
yeah.
One of them, about how long is that gonna take?
Yeah, so that's a great point. We're not gonna tear every corner up all at the same time. We would take a systematic approach, west to east or east to west. And so if you're talking about like one particular intersection where we're doing all 4 corners, that could take a few weeks. Just to tear out what's there, form up the new forms for the concrete, get it poured, wait for it to cure, put the the truncated domes and other stuff in there. So yeah.
I'm just wondering, cause just like some of the other businesses, we do a lot of it outside.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I believe you're taking a good 10+ feet of our landscaping where we place tables.
Well, do you want to go to, let's go look at the intersection.
The
of
other thing you know
down
too
here.
is as they do this, they'll also make sure that the pedestrian system always works during construction. So
Right.
they will sequence construction and have proper signage to make sure that pedestrians can still get around the work zones.
So
It's like doing each corner, you'll do all 4 corners at once and then move on. to the next
it
one.
depends what's most efficient for our, for our crews. I mean, you could just do one corner at a time,
Sure.
but typically if they're there, they're gonna try to do as much as they
Do all of
can, yeah.
Okay.
So,
And then also if there, I mean, because we have 2 large trees in the front that would be where you guys are redoing that sidewalk and putting the bike lane in.
Mhm.
Are they getting removed?
So you're right here on 13th Street, right? At the corner?
Yeah, 1255.
Yeah, so yeah, this is the extent of kind of what we have proposed today. So a little bit of sidewalk going south for that connection. It looks like Dustin's proposed to rebuild the connection to the patio and the deck that you have there.
Okay, so we have the fire pit that runs along the front of this deck.
Yeah.
So it looks like your sidewalk is gonna come
No.
right up to our fire pit?
No, so the existing, you can see where the existing trees where
Yeah,
they sit and the existing sidewalk closer to Galveston.
yeah,
It's just the darker hatched area.
okay.
And,
So
and
does this remain where we have our?
yes, that would all stay the way it
Oh, that's
is. Yeah,
nice. Okay, I thought it was coming up, because I know our property
Yeah.
line is a little farther than
yeah,
where we're
which is
landscaping,
normal.
but I didn't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, and we're happy to, and to their point, we're happy to come out with you with this design concept now and just, put some stakes in the ground and say,
Okay.
this is the limits of where the new sidewalk would
Great
be,
idea.
and
Love that.
we're making sure to save this tree. I don't think we're proposing any trees coming
I
down.
guess, yeah, okay.
So,
That makes sense.
Yeah,
I'll go ahead.
yeah,
Thank
no,
you.
great question. Thanks.
Thank you.
I'll just add on. Sidewalk curb ramp, whether it's self-performed by us or a contractor, a lot of times you'll have a demolition crew.
Mhm.
So removing, prepping, getting down to subgrade, and then the form crew will come in and work on forming and pouring, but that demolition crew probably jumped onto the next
Okay.
ramp, so
Mhm.
like Ryan mentioned, I'm not gonna tear all of them up at the same time, but there would be more than one corner being worked on at
Right.
a time,
Okay,
between demolition crew, form crew, pouring.
Mhm.
well, it'll just rotate.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
All right, we got 5 minutes, so you have 60 seconds.
His picture right here, that street's still about 30 feet wide, and I'm very concerned at the conversation that's been going around about removing curb bounds, because that's a known safety enhancement, and I believe council's goals rank that pretty high. And so I don't want to get into every intersection, but there's a lot of ways to do daylighting on, on this picture playing south of the crosswalk there. And we can be done really cheap, and it doesn't mess with the turning radiuses of big vehicles, so. Whether it's curb bulb outs or daylighting, I think safety needs to be priority over the one truck at 9 AM.
Well, I would, for that small business, I would say it's very important. Yeah, I think that's.
They don't come at, they can be all day long.
Most
Till
cities
2 o'clock.
let cargo come at 1, but pedestrian activity. It works out for us.
But we heard today that we can't, that's something we can't control being where we live.
They don't do that.
Yeah.
I mean, having so much more pedestrian activity would make your business is so much better.
Well, not if you don't have product, because they can't deliver it.
I would say, we generally encourage people to email council all at bendoregon.gov, and we can make sure that your comments are routed to the appropriate staff. Is there anything different that you would recommend in this case, or do you think it's helpful to have everybody on the same page and receive everything, or?
Yeah, I think what we're hearing more is that maybe we need to have I say we, and it's not us, you all, have some specific conversations with some of these,
Sure.
businesses.
Happy to
Yeah,
do
it
that.
sounds like,
Yeah.
but it sounds like a lot of the things that we talked about today have already either been addressed or, right, I'm assuming that you feel a little bit more comfortable about it, but I think that would be.
And let's remember too, the intersection at 12, I think, was chosen for the bulb outs, or what I heard you guys say is because we have actually had crashes there and we have had injury interactions there. So,
Yeah.
so that's why that's there. So, maybe if the bulb out can be, widened just a little bit, I don't know what obviously the design is in your hands, so,
Great sidewalk.
Okay.
So what we can also do as we move forward is obviously there'll be a report out at the next council meeting. We don't, like we normally do, but we can also have Ryan and his team come up with some information, get that out in the council memos, and then have further developments come up. We can, at this point, use kind of the weekly memo as a way to keep council informed of what's going on, if that works.
So my two takeaways now are, say three, I guess. Number one, let's take a deeper dive into the bulb outs at 12th to see if we can come up with a design solution that'll allow the truck turning movements and deliveries to continue unimpeded.
At least a traffic flow
Yes.
plan.
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
Accommodate.
Yeah,
deliveries,
absolutely.
but
Yeah.
May mean leaving them where they are.
It may be, yeah. The two sides are do what we're proposed or leave it as wide as it is, right? So can we find a happy medium in there? Continue to look at enhanced protection options on the buffered bike lanes, more than just 2 stripes of paint. Again, without having too much direct impact to turning movements into driveways, alleys and other things. So again, try to find something in the middle there. And then no need for a large round of public engagement, but definitely continue to engage individually and, block by block, business by business as we develop the concept further.
And update the website.
And update the website, thank you. Yeah, yeah.
Let's go.
Yeah. And
Something
update the
needed.
website, yeah.
Those little things.
Thank you. This is, I wish all of our meetings were like this. We heard from
Yeah, it's good.
everybody, and so many different things that were brought up today. So thank you all for being here. Appreciate it.
All right.
We done? We done.
We adjourn.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.